Ooh, people can hear us.
Oh boy, spooky.
All right. Turn this off and hello.
Greetings.
We are currently 9 minutes away from the start of the Altered Weekly Online League for Wednesday, planned for North American folks, but that doesn't stop certain people, like the person in this voice call with me right now, the TheKelonGuy. How are you doing this second New Year's Day for you?
Hey, what's up? I'm having a great start to my second New Year's Day, although the sleep will come after this, so it's still kind of the first day, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't slept yet, then you're solid,
Exactly.
I guess. So.
Yeah, so yeah, having a good one, but excited for some Altered and to see some of the North American folks that we haven't seen over the last couple days and some other events.
Yeah, and especially since like it's been what now, 2 weeks since a actual event for the Wednesday one because Christmas was canceled and then the previous week was canceled because of VGA. So
Yeah, exactly. BGA had that outage, and so we've had to postpone.
yep. So this is the official Week 11 remake because of BGA. And we are coming up on the event currently. Let's take a look at how many players we have participating. We are up to 27 now. Not that bad considering at the beginning of the day, I think we were at like 8. So I'll take it.
I would also say, like, there have been a lot of events over the holidays that have been a little bit lower on the player count, but in general, the people who have been showing up to these events have been very high caliber players. So, despite, small turnout, I'm still expecting to see a really competitive event.
Yeah, honestly, I'm just hoping, especially with the not as many folks, that we see the people that do lose potentially in early rounds not just drop out like you see a lot of the times. Just so that way we can get a full consistent 6 rounds kind of thing, without there being too many dropouts at the end of it. But either way, we'll see how it goes, and enjoy it regardless, and see what the first tournament of the new year will get us going with. Um, you had the last tournament of the new year yesterday, so how did that one go
Yeah.
for you?
Actually super fun. There are yeah, it's really impressive seeing the players showing up with, really good uniques, really competitive battles in those top tables, which has been really fun. There was a lot of Tasia and a lot of Afanas actually. I didn't really expect to see those numbers. Like I think YOLO was there playing Trace as usual, or a couple people were up in those top tables playing Trace, but it was a lot less than I've seen in previous weeks of my events. So yeah, it's interesting seeing, some of these other really high tier decks when they do have those uniques being pulled out as well.
Yeah, it's interesting as far as like I feel like there's a lot of tier list type of videos coming out recently, and a lot of the separation on that is like people saying, this is this deck with uniques, and this is the tier list without uniques. Um, I was thinking about making my own like tier list video, but I was going to go in a different direction with like the different varieties of decks that you could have, kind of thing,
Mm,
instead of just a solo hero only kind of thing. Like this is like encompassing all of Aphanis or all of Traced. I think Trace is probably just going to be one because I don't know that many differences in Traced other than I guess there's some slight differences in deck construction, but um, pretty similar most of the time, I think. But yeah, that was going to be my idea. We'll see if that comes to pass. We got
yeah,
uh we got leaks coming out soon though, as far as release schedule for Trial by Frost. So that'll be the
yeah,
main focus first.
that's definitely exciting. I mean, I did like the video that Trickster was putting out. I've been saying for a while, like when people are talking about this deck's tier S, this is the best deck, etc., that
Mm,
there is really a big difference between a deck that costs, I guess, $50 including uniques versus a deck that costs 1,000 including uniques, at least as far as how you'd have to, construct those tier lists in order for it to still make sense
mm.
because you're not really evaluating the same thing anymore. But what I would say is that, decks that are cheap, there are absolutely really competitive options for that, which I think is exciting. And I'm excited to see what strategies are going to open up just based on normal cards as well coming out with the next set pretty soon. Not just, effects that you can get purely off of uniques, but I guess if you've been playing a lot of Altered, you know that there are very few options for certain things that you can be doing, um, just based on the limited number of cards that exist so far. So I'm really excited for that to open up a little bit.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting, especially like you mentioned with the people that are more experienced. Like 9 times out of 10, you know what can beat you and what can't beat you when you're playing certain decks. I think the only
Mhm.
difference is if you run into like a deck list that is just not common anymore. Shout out to Itzadi. But yeah, it'll definitely be interesting seeing the card list expand a little bit. And I like that it's expanding, but I also like that it's not going to be an equally as large set as Beyond the Gates, just so that way it doesn't get too crazy right away. But a little craziness isn't too bad. Um,
Yeah, I just
anyone?
think it's gonna be really nice once there's, it's very simple when you go against Sigismar, you're thinking in your brain, "Okay, there's a couple options." I'm either thinking of, okay, keeping permanent removal in my hand for either Monolith or Grand Endeavor, which is, okay, cool, I need permanent removal for expensive things, or they're playing a list with no permanents, but that's essentially it. You know otherwise what their deck is going to contain. It's going to have 2 or 3 copies of Charge. It's going to have a full set of Ortis Trooper, that sort of thing. But I think, once there are just more cards available and more theoretical strategies, I think that could be really interesting and will lead to a lot more, I guess, decision making being involved in, outside of things like, okay, yeah, I probably need to keep permanent removal in this matchup. Things are gonna become a lot more complicated than that, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, definitely. And now we are 2 minutes out from the event. We did get up to 32 players at the moment, so that's good. Thanks for anyone that's joining the stream. Say hi to all the folks. Christopher Skizik and just in training. Cool. All right, but yeah, thanks for everyone that joined in. As you can see, we are celebrating the new year with our hats and fireworks. TheKelonGuy is the Kelon Elemental, just adjusting his glasses there, or his monocle rather, not glasses. I don't know what I'm thinking, but either way, yep, we are 1 minute out now. Good thing that we got at least 32 folks, up to 34 now. We get the last minute. Uh, Everyone joining right a thing. Not you this time though. So otherwise we'd have at least 35 at the moment. So either
True.
way, we're good. But going through all this, anything that you're looking forward to in particular for this event?
I'm definitely excited to see how, I guess, there are some of a familiar cast of people who participate in virtually all of the events, regardless of time zone. But
Hmm.
outside of that, I'm looking to see, what those players are looking to do to maybe combat the metagame they've been playing against other people who are regularly there. But I'm just excited to see what decks will show up today. It's been a really interesting dynamic where in one event you'll see like, okay, Traced is like 8 out of 12 players in the top tables, and then the next event people will try to metagame for that, and suddenly everyone's playing Sigismar, and then the event after that there's like 4 different people who are playing Afanas in the top 6 tables. It's crazy. So I'm sort of excited to see what's going to be up there today. But also, yeah, I know there's a couple players in here who have been playing interesting things. I believe Symbiosis was playing Lindaway at one point, relatively recently, and did a really good job in one of these events. Dexter from Altered Corner, he's been doing really well on Waru despite the Robin Hood nerf. So I'm excited to see how those players perform as well.
Cool, cool. So we are into the first round here. I don't know if you're looking at the tables, but do you have any preferences on something you'd like to see, just based off of what you know is coming?
I'm pulling up the tables right now. Um, I'd actually love to check out table 4, Elwiwi versus A. It's Mark.
All right, pull that one up. Let the art load a little bit as I switch the scene for all you lovely folks. All right.
What do you think?
Refresh.
Who's gonna be on top today as far as hero choice?
It's interesting because, like you said, there are like different heroes that have been popping up more and more. I always lean to Traced and Best of Ones just
Mhm,
based off of consistency. I do think in Best of Three tournaments, I'm more inclined to pick Segismar or Afanis.
mhm.
Um, but when it comes to Best of Ones, it almost feels like that's always going to be the case as far as the setup there. But we'll see how it turns out. We do have uh, we're finally in the game here, so we got a Finn. We don't see very much Finn anymore versus a Kojo.
Yeah, Fen is the LWW special. The player's been playing this deck pretty much exclusively with a few different configurations over the last few months, and they're definitely one of the best Fen players right now. I think that's exciting to see, and they're having pretty good performances in tournaments as well, despite the deck in general having gotten, I guess, a little bit weaker over the last while, or people have been realizing a little bit better how to fight against it. So it's cool. This is definitely one of the people who still is with the hero. So I like checking in, seeing how they're doing.
Yeah, for sure.
Kojo though, playing Spindle actually, that's a uncommon choice, but pretty cool. I'm wondering if they have maybe uniques that really they need to really avoid
Yeah.
them getting removed or something like that. But yeah,
Uh,
pretty cool.
I don't know if it's maybe it's a little bit of the removal, but I also know that there are quite a few unique based Bravos characters that have a requirement to have a permanent in order to get their effect on occasion.
Mm,
Probably my least favorite requirement on a unique is having to have a permanent, but if it's good enough, maybe you want to throw the permanent in there. I don't know, but we'll see. We do have the first unique there for Finn. Rolling a die, gain one boost for each card in your reserve. How many you may discard a card in your reserve if you do draw a card. Yeah, so fun and Anansi there, and it's
yeah,
going to go
definitely.
right back to hand.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about these, ink casters. Getting to replay your good uniques again and again is super nice. Really
Yeah,
good feeling.
especially on the fin, in general, I have to imagine because you're technically only drawing 1 card, per day. So, nice to have a little bit of return help you out and keep your hand a bit of a secret instead of having to play everything from reserve.
Definitely.
But yeah, no, it's interesting as far as, El is concerned 'cause I noticed there was some chat about it, was it last this Monday as far as AGT or
Mhm.
AJT, a new altered team, I believe. So cool to see those popping up
Definitely. I mean, there have been Exalts, Altered Aces, both French teams. I believe AJT is also a French team. So, I mean, of course, in the country that the game comes from, definitely having some of the strongest teams at the moment. But I can say as well, AJT is not just like a meme team or anything. They're really strong. They've been having awesome performances in events. Really solid roster, and I definitely, if I see a bunch of them in a tournament, I assume some of the top tables are going to have them.
for sure. Yeah, no, it's interesting the development of the teams, and I mean, obviously, like you said, French teams are bound to be more expected at this point. Maybe I just need to make a North American only team, no one else allowed kind of thing. I mean, you can be invited because you're always in North American tournaments anyway, but
Oh,
um
that's sweet of you.
yeah, but other than that, yeah, it's cool to see just new ones pop up. The whole team aspect in trading card games is always an interesting one, especially when it comes to like playing together and like sharing cards, especially the idea of like practicing or getting playtime with other people's uniques so you can play just a little bit more. So
Definitely, that is super fun.
but yeah, just looking at the game itself right now, it looks like we have El Elwee on the Fin up at least one spot on the tumult, and was able to have the Anansi stay out there. And other than that, pretty even resources as far as in hand, a little bit more in reserve for the Fin.
That's true. I think though it's also one of these dynamics where when you're taking a turn off with pretty much any deck to play 3 mana landmark, like the spindle that was played on the first turn of the game, you can expect to be behind 1 to 2 expeditions. That's one of the really nice things about playing Trace is that you often don't actually fall behind playing a Haven Bravos Bastion for 2 mana because so often you'll still be able to take one expedition or at least prevent your opponent from advancing on one of them. So you're not falling too far behind. In this case, the Spindle playing that out definitely can lose you a an expedition or two, but so I think it's still relatively even, all things considered.
Yeah, for sure. It's always interesting as far as like Bravo's characters are concerned. It You have access to technically the most sabotage in the game, but I feel like you also get affected by sabotage more than any other faction,
hmm
kind of thing, because you really don't have that much of draw available to you a lot of the ways. But yeah, it's interesting. It's a big you got to play the right things at the right time type of faction, and just hope that your opponent doesn't have too much removal for you.
Yeah, I'd largely agree with that. It's also one of these things where most of the really strong plays that Kojo often has are things that come down at 3 or sometimes even 4 mana.
Right.
So it's a deck that's really waiting to get till these turns where they have, 6, 7, 8, or more mana even to really start triple spelling and putting some outstatted characters out. I think it's really interesting there seeing the Spindle get discarded away. There's definitely a high incentive for a deck that's playing exactly that card in acapella training. Um, to get rid of, things that make it really difficult to play that value game against them, because that's one of the things Fen is actually pretty good at.
Yeah, for sure. And then the acapella training itself, removing that Haven bouncer for the Kojo, one less resource for them to have. I've actually seen a lot of Kojo players operate on fairly low mana and choose not to resource at the beginning of the day, even as early as like 6 mana a lot of the times,
Mhm.
just to avoid going completely out of resources, or at least showing your opponent that you only have one card in hand consistently and they can see everything else on the board, kind of thing. So um, doesn't look like that's the case at the moment, but they will be running fairly low. That rare Sun Wukong will probably help with that a little bit because you can kind of just play it over and over again. But we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, definitely. Sun Wukong is one of these cards I think that's more and more important for a Kojo deck when you're not actually reliant on really strong uniques. Um, Typically, you need some way of, breaking a game state. Sometimes for Kojo, you can get away with playing like really good value cards as uniques, things that'll let you draw a bunch of cards and have relatively low mana costs. Those can do pretty well. Other times, it's more of like the Foundry style of Kojo, where you're looking to make a lot of work out of from reserve abilities of uniques that you have. Sometimes, if you're not working with any of those, what you need is just to be able to play something that's really strong again and again. um, Definitely think this position is looking better and better for Elwiwi, and something that you always have to be concerned to get about whenever you're playing against either Lyra or Izmir is the risk of small step giant leap. So Elwiwi progressing closer.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about. If we knew if Elwiwi had was running the small step in their deck. I feel like at this point, almost all Lyra or Izmir decks are going to run it in some aspect, even if it's a one-off kind of thing. But maybe not. I don't know. It is interesting though on this turn specifically, that the Kojo player set them up self up pretty decently, because they will be able to use the Sun Wukong on the hero side to potentially block the Finn, but they decide to go on Companion, um, to just guarantee a side potentially. Uh, I'm not quite sure what the thought process was there, opposed to going to the left and preventing them from getting adjacent and being afraid of the small step.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. It could just be a situation where they're worried about getting double advanced on if there's another Anansi coming out. But honestly, the question is, can they beat that anyway? And I'm
Yeah.
not really sure. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely looking to be a harder and harder situation here, with that aloe vera coming down. It's just the rate of hitting good cards here is gonna be so high for the Fen player.
Yeah, and then also just losing that rare Sun Wukong to the acapella training played right after it lost the fleeting. So
Mm.
uh, we'll see how it goes. They are down here. We do see the immediate Sandman play, so we're probably not looking at a small step unless they're just BMing. But I don't think that's the case. I don't know LWE personally, but who knows? Could just be BM. I don't mind it if that's the case, but
No, I would strongly doubt that.
we see acapella training come out again. I believe that's the third one. So good usage out of the one costs training card in Lyra. So um, fun fact, that's one of the adventure pass things that I did not select as far as a faction is concerned.
Oh,
So
funny.
I've got a lot of adventure pass stuff, and I've made multiple accounts for them, but not acapella training. Wasn't a fan of the art. So yeah, we're looking pretty not good there. Yeah, Twinkle Twinkle will come out, pretty much guarantee it for the Finn. Nothing left for Kojo. And we're looking at the end of the first game here. Good start for El Wiwi, the Finn player.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just a solidly played game. I think there's a couple little interesting things we were starting to see there, like Elwiwi is choosing to play the common Sandman. That wasn't always the case in many Fen lists, but I think the flexibility of it being able to sleep Aloe Vera, for example, on your own side, and then otherwise using it to close out expeditions, maybe progressing towards Small Step Giant Leap as well in the later stages of the game. That's always a really nice little trick to have in your back pocket. Yeah, things, pretty cool little tunings to the deck to make it a little bit more competitive in recent times. Like it.
Yeah, especially with the idea of the Finn overall being fallen off a little bit in comparison to some other deck lists. So yeah, let's take a look at the tables again. We got a lot of games finished. Let's just pull one up at random here that has not as much. Saw Skizik in the chat. Let's bring up Skizik's table. Table 10. Why not?
Sweet. Hold on just a second.
Right here and look at and switch back to the gameplay for you folks. We are going in on a Keisha versus a Navenka.
Nice.
Navenka's an interesting Lyra hero in general that's been fun to watch progress with like the idea of people at the very beginning just having zero confidence in it um, as far as like being competitively viable because dice rolls I don't like that, but now it feels like it's the dominant Lyra hero in general in comparison to like Finn.
Yeah, I totally agree. It used to be that everyone seemed to be under the impression that that Fen was simply the better option of the two, between our two Lyra heroes, discounting Aurak there entirely.
Yeah.
Joking about Aurak aside, I definitely think that Navenka has a lot more legs to it than we first seemed to think when we were seeing some of the early lists. I think one of the key things that a lot of players have gotten away from that was really important for better versions of the Navenka deck was a lot of them were playing the 3 mana rare Ouroboros Lyra Bastion card to make the die
Right.
rolls better. And I think that was critical for improving the deck there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Everyone thought anytime I saw that deck initially, like the first month or so, people just like, oh, I'm gonna make a fun Navinka deck. They're playing the three rares of that, and then it quickly became a thing of like, yeah, permanents. Just no matter what they do, unless it's two costs and name Haven Bravos Bastion, doesn't always feel the best, you know. But
Totally true. Yeah.
there are some decent permanents. It just they don't feel as good, especially with the way that the metagame is at the moment. Get an early GG from Skizik here, even though they're not close. But we'll, we'll see. It's probably because of all the cards in hand, and I'm thinking they're assuming that we're going to run into some type of Khadgar deck. But uh, Not sure.
Huh. Yeah, that is maybe either just a misreading of the game state or I don't know, or maybe they just think that the game is over at this point because they had to pass. Uh, that's interesting though. In either case, I think the position still looks pretty close in this game.
Yeah, I mean, they double advance here, but I mean, there could still be options. They still have like so many resources in hand. You have to feel like it's not too bad. But
Yeah, it's a ton. It's a ton of resources still.
unless he's just assuming that it's a small step, Navenka, potentially. Oh yeah,
I
he's
think
assuming small step.
Navenka's always playing small step at this point, or virtually always. I think I've seen a list with 1 copy, but I think most are up to 2 and sometimes even 3. I
Yeah,
definitely think because of how low to the ground Navenka has to go often, where sometimes you're just not even able to mana a card, like, for your, like, 6th mana of the game, something like that. It's really important that you can feel confident in the idea that you're just going to put out as many, early things as possible, try to cheese as many expedition wins, roll your dice when you have to try to take, some expeditions you wouldn't be able to otherwise, and then draw a small step to win the game. So I would
yeah.
assume it's definitely possible here.
Yeah, no, that was the thinking coming from Skizik there. It looks like based off the chat, but Carthray with Navenka said that they do not have a small step at the moment, so we may see a potential win here. Still, they could get some advances going, and then just hopefully not run into a small step next turn. But we'll find out. Waiting for the Acacia to play. We do have the unique Anansi from the Navenka. I gain 1 boost for each card in your reserve. If you roll a die, you may add 1 to its result. So the fun little martingale effect that you see on some of the Lyra cards these days. Martingale being the supreme MVP for Navenka decks, it seems like, with the Ouroboros Bastion no longer being a thing. But yeah.
Yeah, Martingale's pretty excellent. I think in general, people have come to the conclusion that just one cost things in general are pretty good in this game.
Mhm.
Interesting though, seeing this is the second unique Anansi that we've seen today in just this first round already. That is a card that often has pretty good effects as a unique, but it's just interesting as well. Especially, I think for Fen, it has to be a really good unique in order to contest that common Anansi slot. For Navenka, that might be a bit more open because not every Navenka list will play Anansi regularly. Here we're now just seeing the Katagear plus Celebration Day plan start coming out for Akesha though. So I think if that continues any longer, the game's going to get locked up really, really quickly. But yeah, Skizik will have to continue playing out Celebration Days quickly.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because, especially with Navenka being just adjacent at this point, even being the first player to play on a turn, and they decide to Celebration Day to avoid a small step, they can't keep on avoiding it. So at this point, they're just going to have to play with the idea of Navenka not running into the small step and hoping that they can advance before Navenka hits just the 1 small step that they need. So um, we are at a pretty even card in hand set up now finally, but we will see the immediate celebration day from the Acacia player. So maybe some more draw coming up here.
Yeah, could be. I I think the important thing here is that Akesha can feel comfortable that this one turn they will not lose the game because they are the first player to act. So, but they need to figure something out so that they can progress very very quickly in order to hopefully win the game for their own with maybe small step giant leaps or otherwise. But just the risk of that being in the Navenka's hand or deck at this point very high. So they need to close it out sooner rather than later.
Yeah, the idea that they immediately celebration dayed, it almost feels like they want to try to advance at least once to put themselves within territory of double small stepping into a win. But Oh, and there we go. We got a Sakuraba route to put them out of small step territory as far as the loss there. That's one thing that uh, I see sometimes in the category decks, but not always.
Yeah, that is actually really helpful in this position. I think it's one of these things that if you're really all in on the Category plan, that's exactly what you need in order for that plan to work really regularly. Um, yeah, totally makes sense to me, and I think that will really save things here for Skizik, and I think this is starting to look more and more like a lock unless Nevenka is able to both advance and also remove this Category from the board, but there's just so many cards in Skizik's hand.
Yeah, it's hard to without knowing exactly what's in hand at the moment. I mean, it was nice for the Navenka to be able to sleep the Sandman to have something on board, um, to potentially get at least one advance this day, assuming that Navenka doesn't have a celebration day. But should be interesting. And then as soon as I say that, we see a celebration day. So of course not. Um,
We had a question in the chat, doesn't step beat day? And the answer is only if you play the step first. Celebration day preventing expeditions from moving, not just at dusk, but just does prevent them from moving that day once it's played.
yeah. Just as far as priority, it's an easy way to look at it is if you look at the BGA board and you see the little X's kind of thing. If those are up, then you just can't advance. Whereas if they're not, you can.
Something that's really nice, it doesn't actually allow you to make a mistake when the opponent has an Isatok out. If you then play a small step giant leap, it doesn't even give you the option to move the illegal to move expedition.
Hmm.
So you can't even misplay in that way, which is very nice.
Yeah. There are benefits to BGA in a lot of ways, and there are times where I do something stupid on BGA that I'll never forget, like the time I accidentally misclicked on character removal with sticky note seal instead of permanent. And I lose to a festival, even though I won on the tumult. So, good times. Um, yeah, so no advance didn't go in there. A lot of stuff on the board, a lot of stuff in hand, at least for the Acacia. Not a lot of mana. You know, usually with these category Acacia decks, you see the potential to the mana going off the board, which is always fun. But not quite there yet. But three advances away for the Izmir Hero and only two for the Navinka, but at this point, a small step won't help by itself unless they have two in hand and they want to just use two, but they would need 12 mana for that. But not for the Akisha. But
Yeah, I'm
no big.
interested here to see whether the Akesha is going to look to try to turn the corner this turn, or whether they're just going to be completely happy to play out yet another celebration day and just keep generating card advantage. I think it's going to come down to whether they're playing more copies of cards like Sakurabru. If they have more Sakurabrus, I think they're going to be totally happy to just play a resource trading game, play out another one, set the opponent another expedition back. But as it stands, they would ideally, in an ideal world, like to wait as long as possible before playing the celebration day, because it essentially forces the Nevenka player to play out and consume their own resources, while then just threatening to, activate that category ability and play it again for free. Um,
Yeah. The interesting
yeah,
thing will be is if Skizik on the Keisha has maned at any point one of their celebration days, or if they're only running two, because we know definitively one is in the reserve. I mean, not in the reserve, in the discard, and then the second one is in the reserve. We do see the second Ysmir Bastion out. Um, uh, that would be a bad thing if those both stayed out, but who knows? I don't see that very often of both of them or two being available, but that does leave the option open for the celebration day to get sabotaged, so that could be pretty huge.
I honestly think that Skizik only makes that play there, though, if they have at least one more celebration day in hand. It could otherwise be some crazy way to enable like multiple small step giant leaps in the same turn, but I would very much assume that they're not going to risk getting their only celebration day removed from reserve like that without having another backup one.
Or it's just the multiple small steps, like you said, but we'll see. We do
They
see the
they
first small step come
do
out. Um,
they would need 3 though in order to win this turn. I think that means that it's small step plus a copy of celebration day so that they do get an advance this turn.
we do see the Hathor return the small step, so technically that would be three.
Yes, but they don't have the mana to play out the third. They don't have any cost
Yeah,
reduction, so
yeah.
The third would be the next turn, and as it stands, the Nevenka does have enough on the board in order to advance on both sides.
Yep, and we see the cloth cocoon knock out the second category, so now they won't even be able to celebration day.
Yeah, I think if that was the plan of Skizik, that was a little bit risky there.
Yeah.
I think they were maybe assuming that because the first one didn't get removed, they might be totally fine to just make a risky decision like that and try to turn the corner. But I think maybe they should have just looked to wait just a little bit more. But I'm wondering now if they can find any way to shore up expeditions here. Maybe some combination of beauty sleeps, and off you go. But they need to prevent any advance now.
Yeah, there's a lot of times where the hero ability is nice, but then there are plenty of times where I know when I'm playing them, I plan around the idea of that they're probably going to play the hero ability, and I'll delay similar to what the Navenka did, a sabotage or some type of removal, so they think that I don't have it, and then be able to play into that when they give me a free turn, pretty much, especially on these high mana days in general, and it kind of just screws them over on occasion, opposed to actually helping. So um, we'll see if there's anything left with two costs. Still a lot of cards in hand. Um, Tooth Fairy will block and sabotage, but will not win anything. And then we see the Twinkle Twinkle, so that's going to be a GG.
Yeah, well done from the Nevenka. I think a lot of people, once they see the first Catagear come out and they don't have a cloth cocoon for it immediately, just start tilting out and making a bunch of very poor decisions. This Nevenka did not do that whatsoever, stayed calm, thought to themselves, okay, maybe I can win with Small Step Giant Leap. Then the Sakurabru came and they said, okay, I'm going to play a long game and play things at the appropriate timings in order to take it down. Really impressive. I haven't typically seen many Nevenkas who are that strong in the late game, so that was really cool to see.
Yeah, if we were looking at the chat there, we saw that the Navenka Carthray actually was manning at least one of their small steps on the initial draw. So that's probably why they didn't see the one that they were looking for initially. And I think Skizik also managed at least one of their small steps. So interesting there. Let's switch back here as we look for the next game. I imagine we're probably close to done with this round. Um,
Yeah, we're into round 2.
Round two time. Let's see what we got here. Round two, we did end up getting 34 players total. Let's see. Do we get any drops? Only one? That's good. Like
That
that.
is good.
All right. Any preferences on what we want to look at here?
I would say, your pick between table 7 and table 8, some awesome players in both tables.
Oh yeah. Let's see. Let's go ahead and jump in on table 8 because that's my favorite number.
Sweet.
All right, let's go here. Waiting for it to load. Again, thanks for everyone that showed up in the chat. Always nice having folks out to watch me. Isn't this great not having ads like on Twitch? It's just so much more superior. It's crazy. Although I am partnered on Twitch, I don't use that account anymore anyway. But either way, let's see what we got here. Waiting on things to load.
Yeah, BGA being a little slow to load sometimes. I think that's the case while people are still making, like, mana decisions even, so sometimes that's why it takes a little bit despite pairings going up, tables being up, and games technically starting.
All right, we're in here. Let's switch over to the gameplay scene. Yeah, Skizik said he managed both small steps at start, so that's why he risked it.
Oof.
Fair, fair, fair. All
Yeah,
right.
happened. Rough.
So we are in a Tasia and Sigismar matchup.
This is a super competitive matchup overall. I think Tasia is one of these heroes that gets a lot better when you have very, very strong and typically pretty expensive uniques. This player, Fernico, absolutely has them. This is one of the strongest Tasia players with a set of uniques that other people have been basing their unique purchases off of. So I would expect good things from them. And also starting off turn one by playing out Aloe Vera. Interestingly, Sigismar is on a Ortis carrier list. These have largely fallen out of favor, but Sigismar in general, a really strong deck when they can leverage it and not get double advanced on turn one.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like you mentioned, you don't see that many carrier permanents in the Sigismar decks anymore. I think I was running it at one point because I just had a unique that required a permanent, and I was messing with the idea of just using low cost permanents opposed to going to the monolith side of things. I even think I used a rare slot on a brass bug hub at some point, just so I could have a two cost permanent that I could play early, kind of thing. Um, and just the idea of getting more tokens appealed to me, and it worked okay. But I eventually got another unique that I didn't require a permanent, so that went away right away. But either way, um, we do see the unique gatekeeper. Let's take a look at it. When I leave the expedition zone, create an Ortis recruit soldier token in each of your expeditions. If you control a token, create two tokens in my expedition. So it has a little bit of the Jeanne d'Arc effect, as well as just creating double tokens right away. So not too bad, not too bad.
Yeah, not bad at all. I like it. It's one of these things where, yes, most of the token producer uniques from Ortis are typically just the way to go in decks like this,
Yeah,
but there is definitely something to be said for cards that are, cheaper than 5 mana that let you keep some advantage over multiple turns, and that's what they're trying to do here with the Gatekeeper. Pretty sweet.
yeah. No, it's interesting as far as Sigismar in general. Obviously, we see a lot of Sigismar being played. I think probably amongst the top players to even the lower end of people just getting into the game, I think Sigismar is probably far and above the most popular hero.
Mm,
So it's just interesting to see the different things that have come from that much play. Originally, from the start of the meta, we didn't see that much success per se on Sigismar as far as like between them and Waru and everything. But it's cool to see that they're finally being the top of the list as far as Ortis is concerned in general, and that whole go wide strategy. I mean, look at all those tokens. We're only on day three.
definitely, and I mean, many people like to talk about Traced having been a deck that was held down a lot by the really bad Waru matchup, but I think that was also very much the case for Sigismar. Um, yeah, I think it was just different uniques that were good in both decks. Suddenly people are really noticing. I mean, yeah, those token producer uniques would have been pretty good in Waru, but they're just so strong in Sigismar with the current configurations, and that matchup was not good at all for Sigismar, especially when like on Board Game Arena, there's open deck lists virtually. You can look at prior matchups of players.
Right.
That makes it very hard to win with something like the Monolith when, your opponent on Waru, can keep a sticky note seals instead of manoing it, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, definitely. It's interesting overall. I mean, on the game that we're seeing right now, though, we got even on the tumult. We do have some anchored characters coming from the Tasia player, helping out with the resources between the aloe vera. I don't believe the spindle got two boosts in order to resupply those, so yeah, it didn't. So we don't see the double setup there, but we'll see at least one for the aloe vera to get some more resources there. But we do see a lot of tokens come out for the Sigismar. Um, Interesting Kodama play here from the Tasia. It's the common Kodama. Okay.
Yeah, it's a card that we don't always see in these in some of these more aggressive Tasia configurations. But the secret I can definitely say about this Tasia list is that they're looking to put boosts on their plants long term.
Mm,
Um, Definitely really helps when you notice, say, you're getting outstatted on one side, but you're winning the other, and that's not going to change. You can play out for just 2 mana, sleep a Kodama, then maybe with cards like Nurture, which we're seeing right now in the reserve, put some additional boosts on it that do last the next turn. So pretty cool.
Yep, and we still see the Sigismar going wide, wide, wide with another unique on the Monolith Rune Scribe, 2 cost, 3 from reserve. When another non-token character joins your expeditions, if you control a token, create 2 Ordis Recruit Soldier tokens in my expedition. Gotta love the double creation on those uniques.
Yeah, definitely. That's a lot of characters that they can output. That's really nice.
Yeah, and it pretty much makes anything that gets put on the board by specifically a Muna player in Tasia um, uh, apt to get removed by a teamwork training potentially if they wanted to, especially if they spent extra to anchor it like you would for an aloe vera. But not the case here. We do see a Sandman come out though, just to sleep the anchored character, the good old counter for that. Um, and we'll see another double advance for the Sigismar.
I think that's also been one of these upgrades that a lot of Sigmars have been making is playing a lot of copies of Sandman, especially when they do have token producer uniques. Getting just extra turns of value out of them when they are that strong can be really good, and then otherwise closing the game out early is also really good.
Yeah, it adds. It's cool to see like adding an aspect of control to the Sigismar decks, that opposed to just flat out, I'm gonna go all out and hopefully I can beat you before you have anything online, kind of thing. Um, and just, I mean, what are we at here? 7 mana. So yeah, it's interesting, and now they're only a double advance away from winning the game. I actually, on occasion, have liked trying out Anubis on Sigismar just for the fun of it, um, and hitting the bigger or the anchored characters that just get left out if it's just one of them, kind of thing. But that's a little bit different, and I've been taking it off and on, especially when you can just add like Sandman's kind of thing. That's a
Yeah,
little bit
I'm
less. So
I'm an Anubis anti-fan, unfortunately. I think people have really been picking up on the fact that really expensive things are typically really, really bad the way things are at the moment, at least.
yeah.
Um, I think it's just there are so many removal options that do exist in the game. The thing is, so few of them are actually good on the account of just the cost that the removal spells themselves cost in comparison to what they're removing with them. That dynamic changes when suddenly your 4 mana Banishing Gate actually feels like a good removal spell when your opponent plays a Kaibara, that sort of thing. And it's one of these things where, yeah, just playing larger things, they typically get outstatted really easily. It doesn't help when you're playing against Haven Bravos Bastion and anything that you play in the early game is suddenly getting outstatted by things that cost even less than yours. And there's just a plethora of people playing 1 and 2 cost characters at the moment, and then certain decks that'll run into 3 and 4. But really, everyone wants to just be playing as low to the ground as possible. And in that sort of metagame, not a big fan of Anubis. I love the idea of the character though, in that when you're already playing Sigismar, so you get the free token to sacrifice every turn. It's
Yeah.
just practically you're not actually removing something that's particularly worthwhile most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time it's definitely the case. It's more of a niche thing that happens like, oh, this is nice, kind of thing, but not that often. We do see the unique come out for for the Tasia, the Chiron. When another character joins your expedition, if you control 3 or more characters, up to 2 target characters each gain 1 boost. So that a little bit of the boostage stuff that you were talking about earlier, and just keeping characters out there and being able to boost them up for multiple turns. So
There is also a very high chance here that one of the remaining cards in hand for the Teja player is a unique that lets them anchor things whenever you gain boosts,
mm,
which would result very quickly into a board here that is largely anchored for subsequent turns from now. Things often snowball like that with Tasia when you can give multiple characters anchored at the same time and additional stats. It's not like asleep characters from Waru, for example, where they're not counting that turn. They're counting very much, and they will count even more the next turn.
yeah. So we'll see what happens here. They do have 3 mana, so I'm sure if they wanted to play it, they can. We're still waiting on the Sigismar to see if they are going to do anything crazy. They just decided to play the Sandman on the companion side to get those double tokens from the unique Monolith Rune Scribe. Um, but they are still only one stat up on water, and there's still one stat up on the hero side for the Tasia player. So we may be looking at the Tasia making a big move on this day to potentially come back from being two spots behind on Tumult.
Yes, however, Sigismar is representing charge super hard here. The playing the Sandman onto that side, putting the tokens where they're at, they're essentially saying they're either holding removal for 2 mana or charge.
Yeah,
Um,
two
so
two
it's
two
not it's
mana
not a
is yeah, 2 mana is always dangerous on Ortis. You can't feel comfortable, but we'll see what Frenico's going to do here. They may have a chance. Who knows? See, you were talking about all the low to the ground, one cost, two cost stuff.
Mhm.
Why don't people play more Kraken's Wrath? I mean, come on, 5 costs, easy. Maybe.
Unfortunately, it's like, yes, there are certain situations against a Tasia board where it would suddenly feel really good when your opponent, plays these crazy uniques, their entire board sticks around for a turn, and you think to yourself, "Wow, I get to start off my next turn by removing 4 of their characters." And then you realize that you have 2 mana left, and they have their entire mana remaining, and then they'll just anchor their board again. Um, that is typically the problem dynamic. It's like it's only good on turns where you're both trying to set up at the same time, and you're somehow able to pass the turn back to your opponent enough times in a row for them to run out of mana, and then you play Kraken's Wrath. Kraken's Wrath costing 5. That is a massive amount when you're typically needing that card on turns where you have 6, 7, maybe 8 mana, but by then your opponent's typically already very close to winning the game if you're a control deck. So hard to make
Semantics.
work.
Semantics. Kraken's Wrath. Put it in your decks. Just kidding.
I love Kraken's Wrath. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm well known for playing horrible things like Lindaway into a traced metagame, but Kraken's Wrath feels really good in a deck that gets to play Baba's Isba. So there
there you
are
go.
options to make things like that work. It's just it requires so much setup.
Yep, we are looking at a one for one there. So low on resources for the Sigismar player. At this point, we've seen two uniques from them. Um, Only on 7 mana, potentially 8 here, but then they would only have 2 cards in hand. With the Tasia player having 2 cards in reserve and maybe 3 in hand. So we may run into the issue where the Sigismar player advanced a lot really quick and then ran out of resources to potentially win. But we do see a Baba Yaga come out and let them draw a card. But should be an interesting day to see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. I'm still wondering if the Sigismar might be playing Grand Endeavor in their list, because if
Mm.
so, it's going to feel really good for them if they can simply play it here and then pass the turn. Otherwise, though, we definitely still very much have a game. It's really hard to come back from these positions where your opponents get adjacent and you're not threatening to win the game yet. But the Sigismar having to make the first action there and running relatively low on resources, Tasia can still come back. It's a hard spot, but I still believe. I think there's a chance.
Yeah, it definitely would have been a good case there for the Sigismar if they did have that Grand Endeavor in hand and were able to play it, especially with the idea of Muna. I mean, Muna heroes in general, interaction, removal. Come on, what are you going to play? Mana Reaping? But definitely no sabotage. I mean, there are Muna sabotage, but I mean, how often do you see it? Not that often. But anyway, we don't see it. We do see them try to draw a bunch. I assume that's in an effort to potentially figure something else out here. We do see the Alchemist come out though and put them in a pretty big stat advantage to just try to take this thing, and it's going to be pretty hard for the Tasia to cover both expeditions. I'd have to imagine.
Yeah, it's true, and I mean that's very much the power of Sigismar that we're seeing. There just perpetually is that dude on the hero side there. It's just saying, "Okay, I will win if you let me. I'll win it." And yeah, Tasia also running out of resources when they have to play. I get or the resources they're running out of are just mana. They have to play multiple things that cost a lot onto essentially the wrong side when the Dracana is weak on forest and the opposing companion expedition advances on forest. Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. The funny idea and the reason why uh, like the idea of like a Sadi is appealing to me in a lot of ways, even though it's not necessarily the most popular hero in general, is the idea of using mana as some type of resource advantage opposed to like you're on like day two or day three and you have uh 8 or 9 mana kind of thing, right? And most of the time people talk about like the idea of like, oh, if you're on Atsadi, then it's and by the way, good recovery there by the Tasia, not losing an expedition.
That
But
was stunning.
yeah, yeah, crazy. Anyway, but yeah, the idea with Itzadi that I find that works almost always the best is that you do still have low cost cards that you can play, and you can almost after you with the idea of playing 1 to 2 cost cards, and by that time you already have so much more mana than your opponent that they can't really even counter your big guys, and you're probably 2-0ing anyway, right? Um, it's not consistent, but it's fun,
Mm.
So it's
I mean,
it,
I think like many of the other like so-called really weak heroes at the moment as well, Atsadi stands to gain potentially a lot from subsequent set releases. I think spoiler season will be interesting, seeing if there's better ways to enable that sort of strategy. As it stands, I think people have largely figured out that unless you have a set of really cool Foundry armor uniques, the way to go for Bravos has been Kojo, even if you
yeah.
do want to play that ramp style. Just generating tokens every so often, sometimes with relevant stat lines, is a big help for a lot of these strategies. At Sadi, I think one of the problems is that typically I think it's really good when you're playing Tiny Jin and you get the right expeditions on it and you don't lose a bunch of expeditions early game, right?
Yeah.
But otherwise, that can feel really rough. One of the last expeditions to show up is that mountain that your opponent doesn't need to advance on, and you're like, you're punching air, you're getting really frustrated that all of your cards are coming out at the wrong timings, and it's just so common with those ramp characters that you just need the right expeditions to show up to enable your strategy, and then you're at the mercy of a single removal spell potentially completely dismantling you when they're already really far ahead.
And we see the charge come out. Um, it
Finally.
it was a good recovery by the Tasia player there, almost taking that hero side, but 2 costs like we talked about before is sometimes too much to deal with, and we see the Sigismar take it in the end there.
I think
Congratulations.
one of the things as well that we saw was the Sigismar was running low on resources, but they had both Baba Yaga and Ozma over a couple turns there to really completely refill. They could keep manaing, no problem. Wasn't particularly worried about enabling the Ozma because they have that Ortis carrier out from that first turn of the game. So yeah, job well done, managing to leverage that card advantage, those card advantage cards to prevent them from running out of gas entirely. And it was enough. Finding the charge and a bunch of dudes works.
Charging a bunch of dudes with the addition of some draw. How can you go wrong?
It's a good
Let's.
strategy. What can I say?
Yeah, it's true. Draw cards. That can't win you a game um, unless they're running Loki. You never know. I know that was a thing. Who is the player that was running the Loki deck? I don't
That's
remember.
so coy.
Yeah. So
Yep.
fun stuff. All right, still in round two. I don't see who's still playing. We still have one more game.
Table 14 and 15, it might be.
Oh yeah, let's go. Table 14 looks like it has more people, more time potentially. Yep, we do. All right, there. Lock it. And let's switch back the scene so all you lovely folks can watch the game too. We do see an immediate double advance and see Finn win. Unfortunate for the Basira. Um, Back we go. Sorry, folks. I wanted to give you another game to watch, but that might not be the case. We may just be looking at around three here, but either way, we still got more than half to go.
Yeah, I was
Um,
almost excited to talk about Basira there for a minute while looking through the reserve cards, and then I realized that while I was looking through the reserve cards, the game had ended. That was unfortunate.
yeah, almost excited to talk about Basira. That's probably a
Right.
pretty common thing that's been said before. Anyway, let's see here. Basira is like the middle child, right? Like, oh yeah, people talk about how bad Saudi is, and then oh yeah, people talk about Kojo being the only viable hero, and then Basira is kind of just like, hey guys, I can I can do the loop too. I can do the loop.
It's
Um,
true. I do have to say, like, there are builds for that hero that do feel competitive. I think though, even when they're at their peak and they do have those peak uniques, they're not like more competitive than the other couple competitive heroes when they also have those uniques. But they do start playing around that level. I think the dynamic that's interesting is that at some point in the game, there will be a chance for a Basira with correct uniques to take a double advance seemingly out of nowhere. But once that's been done, it's done. Typically, then either a sabotage comes in or something else will disrupt it, or they'll find a way to small step giant leap. That being a faction that doesn't have access to it, that sort of thing. And it takes a lot of setup in order to make that work. The games that Basira is winning are the ones where it gets to do that multiple times, where they're taking an okay amount of expeditions early, leveraging like red and helping hand, those sort of effects, and then looking to double advance out of nowhere with foundry armors, and that can work, especially when it happens back to back turns in a row. Turns out quadruple advance really good.
Quadruple advance, really good. No way. All right, there. I think we're wrapping up. We are in round three at this point. We have currently 8 undefeated players. Good for them. Let's see here. I don't think anyone's started quite yet. Again, I wanted to say thanks to everyone that has shown up for the stream. It's nice being able to actually watch games opposed to, BGA not working, and just talking for 30 minutes. But, now we're talking for longer and we're actually watching games. So appreciate everyone that's joined. Hope you stick around and we can watch some more games as we go. Let's see here. Um, take a look at what we have available here. I guess we could probably stick to the top 8 at this point. We see Usagi, Symbiosis, Mime-sun, Rukito Mukito, Kaifo, Yo, Hannibal Lettier, and Martion. Do you have a preference there?
Table 2 is a really interesting deck. If that one starts, I'd love to jump in there.
All right, let's pull that one up. Go in there. Let's switch over the scene so you guys can actually watch games instead of our faces. There. So we do have the double Rin and Orchid matchup, both undefeated at the moment. So at least we'll have one Rin and Orchid in top 4 at this point.
All right, I did not expect the double. I knew one of these players was on the Ren, but yeah, that's pretty surprising.
Um, which player did you know?
That would be what's the name? Rukido?
Okay, so I knew Mime Sun was on Red. So,
Oh, that's
uh,
really funny.
actually played against him recently on the Rin this last Monday. Yeah, had to been Monday. So I know this is in fact a um, festival Rin.
Nice.
Um, absolutely obliterated it, by the way. So I'm obviously better. Anyway, um, I feel like a good indicator of when you know something's a festival-ish deck in Muna is when you see the common Spindle Harvester, because, gee, I wonder what it's going to be used for, kind of thing. Um, we do see the festival come out early for Rukito as far as the that Ren and Orchid, which will allow Mimesun to double advance and double anchor here. So
Interesting.
Anytime you can
I
keep out characters when you're playing these festival decks in Muna is always a good thing.
I think so too. I mean, it being a festival matchup, I definitely think there is actually potential for one of these people to sort of accidentally win the game by playing things out and simply getting there.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also the case that oftentimes these festival decks just do not play any removal either. So the festival game plan, I think the modus operandi for this game is just going to be play festival before your opponent.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've seen at least two reapings in Mimeson's deck. Not sure as far as Rikito's concerned, but we'll see. Um, Interesting enough, I was playing a Sierra deck against him when he was playing the Rin and Orchid.
Huh,
Uh,
funny.
so he did end up mana reaping a Brass Bug Hive at some point, and lucky enough for me, I had another Brass Bug Hive in hand, so sucks for him. Anyway, we do see the Inari out. I assume they're gonna want to anchor it to get that draw going, but we'll see if it's able to stay out there. Oop, Festival.
Yeah,
They do.
that's both players managing now to have a festival out, but neither yet winning the game with it. Just,
Yeah,
it's coming.
yeah. Not quite available at the moment. We can see at least one anchor come out for Mime Sun at the moment, with Rikito being able to anchor that Anari with the Moon Caregiver. Um, so we'll see. Good old fashioned rare Mowgli. Gotta go ahead and anchor the aloe vera, probably the smart choice there. Each of them will get a 1 and 1 advance. Pretty far along the tumult for just being day 3 at this point. But we do see a lot of hand advantage for Rikito here. So
Yeah, definitely.
I have to imagine we might see something coming from them here fairly soon.
The other thing, I think it's an interesting spot here because Rukito has one major advantage going into the next turn here, which is that they have a character with fleeting already in play, which is going to be great for them versus the aloe vera that's in play not having anything on it yet. That
Yeah,
being said, the
we do.
player who has the first action is Mimson on the other one, um, which which does mean that if both players satisfy the condition, the the one who is the first player to move will win the game first.
and we
So it's a really close spot.
and we do see Rikito type in chat. Guess I lost. Um,
Yep.
because we do see the Capelia come out from going hand to reserve and will have fleeting. We will see at least one anchored character with the Muna caregiver. Um, the question is do we see something get asleep here? It's pretty much only going to be Beauty Sleep or a Kodama that will allow you to do that. Um, but which we see neither at the moment. But there are 3 cards in hand for Mime Sun. It's funny, like the idea of just like looking for festival conditions opposed to just like looking at the tumult, like almost like it doesn't matter at this point.
No, it's true. Like I've been playing a lot of Argent Festival, and the other thing that's sort of crazy is at some point you stop even realizing what deck your opponent is playing. You just go and look at deck lists and you count how many relevant removal spells and sabotage effects are there in the deck, and then their deck just becomes a series of numbers. Otherwise, that's
Yeah,
it. That's all you think about. You think, can I combo this turn? How can I set up for the best combo the next turn? And how many removal spells am I playing around? And does that change my decision making?
yeah. Fun unique there with the Dracana. I gain anchored from anywhere. At noon, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If you do, each player may resupply. I'm actually a big fan of those abilities that allow multiple players to draw and or resupply because it makes the idea of having some type of deck oriented around like a out of faction Quetzalcoatl be kind of fun in Muna, but I haven't seen it come to fruition yet. But it could be fun, especially with like those uniques that allow you every time a character joins, you can boost something up. If you found a consistent way to loop it the same way you could in Bravos, that would be cool. But
That definitely sounds cool, yeah.
we do see the Kodama come out though, and Mimeson's calling the GG.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a crazy win there.
We're on a simple day 4 Lyra Festival win. Rin versus
Honestly,
Rin.
that's pretty slow.
Just because you can do it in like day 2 doesn't mean everyone can, okay?
I
Not
I
every
do think it's
not
it's a
everyone's Arjun.
situation though where Rin and Orchid is a really good festival deck in the sense that they get to dig through their deck pretty well.
Mhm,
However, one of the main problems with Rin is that because they get to dig through their deck pretty well, but need to satisfy conditions in a little bit more challenging of a way sometimes, it's often the case that people will find removal spells for your first festival um, by the time that you're trying to win with it. And I think for that reason, maximizing your turn 3 win rate is one of the best ways that you can be playing Festival at the moment when, decks like Traced are still trying to set up and then start, their Dr. Frankenstein to dig through their deck with the Haven already out to try to find those copies of Kill on Burst, that sort of thing. But I guess it depends on the matchups you're trying to target, really, which is going to be better.
Looks like we got a request in the chat here for Chaos Table is Subash Mirror or Subash, depending on if you want to do stuff correctly. Let's see. It's table 11, so I guess we can jump into that one until we get into the next round. Good thing with that game ending early is that plenty of games left to watch. Right, table 11, let's pull that up. Let me switch the scene so y'all can watch. Du-du-du. Yeah, the thing about Rin and Orchid to me is I almost wish that the ability activated after cleanup, so that way you could keep things and not have to get rid of them. But you know, who cares? I don't. I don't play Rin and Orchid. Um, So interesting board state here, pretty even on the tumult. We do see a brass bug hive in the reserve for Cindenfill, and we do see the Haven out though for Chaos.
Yeah, this is interesting. I think I'm checking the reserves, and there were two super crazy uniques played from Chaos. And I say super crazy, which is interesting by Axiom standards. They're not like good traced uniques, but for Subash, these are incredible uniques. Being able to play out a Capellia that sticks around that draws multiple cards over 2 turns, that's really sweet. So, super interesting stuff going on there. I think there might have been a misplay or like a misclick even in the mana or like the noontime trigger thing this turn. I would have very much assumed that the bottom Subash here would have wanted to just play out a Brassbug Hive, considering the number of expeditions that are still left, and the fact that there is the rare Inari already in reserve. But it could also just be the case that they're trying to put out power this turn while there aren't a bunch of things sticking around in reserve. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's interesting as far as the play for like Brass Bug Hive, especially on Subash, because it's not necessarily the win condition the same way it is for like Sierra decks, and you don't really have to play around it. So it's always interesting to see when those folks decide to play a hive. I almost always see it in the deck list. It's just a matter of do they want to play it? Do they not want to play it? And I have to agree with you, especially with that much space left on the tumult. It feels like you want to get it out there, especially on a 6 mana turn. But who knows? They may know something that we don't, and we'll see how it turns out.
I mean, we also at the point at which we clicked on this game, it took like a minute for a decision to be made there at noon. And what I think is actually happening, there's a really weird thing with BGA where sometimes it will actually let you like take back certain moves, like when you haven't passed the turn yet during the afternoon.
Hmm.
But interestingly, when you do something at noon like that, it often just won't have the same sort of logic involved. So I have a feeling what happened was they, absentmindedly clicked the Subash button, which is I will put a card from my hand into reserve at noon, and then realized, oh, this is actually not really optimal here. But I could be entirely wrong. I mean, this is a 1-1 player so far, but very high elo as well. I would very much assume they know what they're doing. So it could have just been a weird spot where they're just looking at what could be coming out and calculating Haven stats. Hard to know.
Yeah, there's always a chance that there's misclicks. I know I've had my fair share of them where I accidentally click on a teamwork training and I only have one character out on the expeditions. So that doesn't always feel good, but it's you live and you learn. It is BGA. BGA helps you sometimes. BGA hurts you sometimes. But we do see everything in the reserve for the bottom sub-ash player, but we will see an immediate sabotage get hit here and say goodbye to the Brassbug Hive.
Yeah, that's also totally the reason why that was almost certainly the intended decision to put out that hive the turn before, because they also had the first move, so they would have been able to play it without the risk of a Tooth Fairy sabotaging it. Now it doesn't have that effect, and with the Haven out, it's just playing a game of Havenless versus a game with Haven. And thanks to those uniques from the early game, it looks like the top Subash is both ahead on expeditions and ahead on card advantage.
Yeah, not looking ideal at the moment. Especially, you're most often wanting to use that Inari for the activation ability, especially in reserve. We will see the Foundry Armor able to produce a Brass Bug and let them get up on the companion side, but may not be that great in the sense of being behind, and they're going to lose at least one expedition on the hero side at this point, it seems like. But we'll see what is going to be played. Side note, really like the armor jammer in general. Fun permanent.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that was one of these tech pieces that really came through from watching players like Yolo Akin incorporate the common armor jammer into their trace builds. I like the idea of playing cheap landmarks in general, especially because they can enable uniques, like you were mentioning earlier. I think it was with might have
Brassbug
been
Hub.
Bravos,
Brassbug Hub.
some Brassbug Hub. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Just in general, the idea of getting unique abilities that might be 20 euro uniques instead of 100 something euro uniques because they have a landmark restriction. That's
Right.
really nice.
Yeah, and that goes into a thing. Like a lot of folks get to the idea of like, I have to have these uniques to be competitive. You don't. The majority of online stuff and even in-person stuff at this point is best of ones. And if you get a solid unique that maybe has a landmark restriction and you hit the right setup at the right time, you can beat a lot of these meta decks. Like I even saw in the prime hit of the Waru meta it lose against the Trace deck, right? Um,
Mm.
which was considered like the worst matchup at that time, right? But it happens, and you just gotta give it a shot. It's not always hopeless. Use the uniques you have. Not everyone can spend thousands of dollars on uniques and want to run 3 token producing uh, uniques on Sigmar. So you might not be doing too bad. In general, I think the game as a whole is pretty nice as far as affordability, from commons to rares. We don't have commons, rares, legendaries, super ultimate rares, magnificent rares kind of thing. So um,
That's definitely true. Yeah.
either way, we're going here. Most of the resources used for the bottom Subash here. We do have one card in hand with 3 mana, so it could just be about anything. But there is a lot of resource available for Chaos in the top. Um,
No, I think the only card that is still potentially alive is Hooked, but even then, that's just the problem is there's infinite resources with Haven out. If it wasn't infinite resources with Haven out, it's maybe doable with some really good draws, but as it stands, like, there's virtually no way for the Bobbin Subash to find, uh, a way to prevent at least one advance this turn, and they need more than one.
Yeah, we also see the idea of that Dr. Frankenstein unique basically has the same one, same ability, but activates from reserve. Um, it's going to be able to pretty much put them ahead on. No, they'll be ahead on hero side even with the hooked, but then they can get hooked again, I guess. So 2 mana left for maybe an Ogun play, I guess.
Yeah,
Oh,
I think that the top Subash would rather not play out Ogun this turn. It represents such an easy way to win the game because it is that rare Ogun as well, for an upcoming turn. And yeah, so at the moment,
another
just
Haven.
plays out another Haven. Yeah, interesting.
It's funny how the Haven Bravo Sebastian became more of an Axiom card.
Oh, totally. I think it makes sense. There's just many more ways to leverage it when you're playing cheap cards in that faction.
Yeah,
That's
it's
pretty
funny.
much it.
Yeah, it's funny. Like the idea of putting cards from hand to reserve is definitely a unique effect you see a lot in Bravos too. It just doesn't feel as good a lot of the times as it does for an Axiom player, but it just
I
depends.
would say though that Subash does operate very similarly to most Bravos decks with Haven. Subash is not a Haven deck the way that Traced is a Haven deck.
Right.
Um, yeah, I think Subash is a deck that typically, if they're trying to do the Traced thing, they're a bad Traced, and if they're trying to do the Sierra thing, they're a bad Sierra. But there is this really interesting area sort of in between the two where you do get to leverage some interesting mid-rangey cards. And if you do find things that have good token synergies or otherwise just good when played from reserve synergies that maybe cost a little bit more than the sorts of things that a Traced is looking to play, it's actually reasonably competitive. In this case, it's really rare to run into a Subash mirror, and honestly, to me, it looks like mostly, yeah, the better uniques or at least the uniques that were more suited for that gameplay style are definitely what are doing the best job here.
Yeah. Shout out to all the Axiom players who won't admit it, but know that they have the most consistent faction competitively. I'll say that to the day that I die. How many other factions have 3 competitively viable heroes? Go ahead, name them. I'm waiting. No? Okay. Glad I
No,
could prove a point.
that is true. To an extent, that is true. I would agree. Um,
We can name them
I you
off
know,
if you want.
I I do wanna shout out to my Izmir, faction though as well. That
Yeah.
faction does have various options there. I think they're I think
Calm down, Lindaway player. It's just
yeah.
let's relax, okay? It's okay. It's okay. Plus, I just like to gaslight Axiom players. I play Axiom too. Okay, it's just obvious to me which one has the most consistency. At the moment, we may see something different in Trial by Frost. Anyway, uh, probably looking at a win here for Chaos.
Yeah, probably is definitely one way of putting it there. It's a player who has all the things versus a player who doesn't have them, not for lack of trying, but I think, yeah, it's, just overpowered over time there. Interesting dynamic though. I definitely think there's something to be said for these relatively cheap card advantage cards in a deck like Subash. Um, it is I think the thing that actually hurts Subash the most as far as decks that are currently meta in Altered is specifically Sigismar. And the reason why I say that is that that's where you most often see this Baba Yaga completely destroying you sort of thing going on. Like, imagine you're a Subash player, you pay a mana, you make your token, you're feeling good about it, you even, you've put something discounted into your reserve as good stats, and then you play it immediately, and your opponent just outstats your brass bug and draws a card. You're now like essentially two card uses down. Your opponent's played virtually nothing. They have something that's discount with good stats to play the next turn that will again outstat your brass bug if you want to do that again. and you're already just low on cards. It's a really rough position to be in. I think, it's those sort of dynamics that make it look really rough. But when they're able to make those aggressive early plays and force out those sort of plays from, for example, a Sigismar player, but then they have the things in that early to mid game stage to really, get back up with the card advantage and play a pretty fair game while digging towards their own late game strategy, like Brassbug Hive. It's actually reasonably competitive.
Yeah, I think we've seen some success in like land-based tournaments for Subash. I believe it was Caleb over in one of the EU tournaments that was run as Subash with some fun, unique martingales. Really focused on like the idea of returning cards from reserve to hand or removing fleeting kind of thing. That was a fun deck to see as far as like online and to see how it operated. I think we even saw like a Bravos Vanguard out of faction. Um, but
I
yeah,
think that's actually a really good card in Subash, by the way. Bravos Vanguard is super sweet for the deck.
yeah,
It is one of these things that is sort of pseudo card advantage if you're lacking like uniques that do that sort of effect.
mhm,
That can definitely help. Um, I mean, myself, I've played a little bit of Subash. I had a reasonable finish, and I think an AWOL event with it at one point. And I know Elio, who also makes some YouTube videos, is a very strong Subash player. Did pretty well in the Ace season finals. I think that
mhm.
was early November, something like that.
Yeah, I remember
Um,
that.
and yeah, Elio, super strong Subash player.
Yeah, switch over to table two here. Hannibal Lettier and Usagi, and oh yeah, also shout out to Elio. It's probably one of my favorite altered YouTubers. I'm happy that he was able to make a new video recently. Had a little bit of a break there. I like watching his videos a lot.
I
Um,
actually got into my first competitive deck thanks to Elio videos.
oh
So
really?
yeah, totally. It was a traced video of his, and I was like so sold on his kill on cylinder tech at that point in time. Thought it was really cool. I think I've changed a lot, both as a player since then, and just have been, playing all sorts of different decks. But yeah, it definitely was Elio's content that was my intro to competitive altered.
Yeah, nice. I think as far as like videos that I consistently watch, as far as altered content, I almost always would watch his first. So cool that we're able to connect on that. So either way, here we do have an Aphanis. I think this is one of the first Aphanises we've seen thus far. Obviously a good hero, and we do see a Sigismar as well. Um, 1 and 1 on that first turn, though. We do see that fun out of faction Baba Yaga that you were mentioning before. Always a good turn one play. Get a little bit of draw and have a fun little two cost play that you can play right afterwards.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. It's a great turn 1 play, but the fact that it leads into so many strong turn 2s for, Ortis specifically is really nice. Um, 3/2/2 for 2 is an awesome stat line, especially when you've likely advanced on one or at least seen 2 expeditions, the first time. You're often likely to be able to either stall someone on the forest or either that or advance yourself on a forest, tile if you get one.
Sorry, everyone, I forgot to switch over the game. Anyway, now we're looking at the game. Faunus versus Subash. We do see a Sleeped Alchemist based off of that Foundry mechanic unique. Let's take a look at it. From hand, if you control 3 or more characters, up to 1 target character gains a sleep, and that includes the mechanic itself when you play it. And from anywhere, if you control 3 or more characters, draw a card. Um, Pretty good mechanic. I actually have a really similar one. It's also statted as a one stat. I don't remember what stat it is, but I think it's a 0/10. It's a 2/2. It has that same draw effect, but instead of the hand effect where you sleep it, it has the token producer effect. If you play a non-token character in expeditions, you produce a token.
Oh, that's
So
funny. I have a nearly identical Foundry mechanic that draws a card, when it goes to reserve and is also a token producer, which is super nice. I think it's the best thing I've opened. Um, I was enjoying that in the Wario days very much, but yeah, sometimes these Foundry mechanics can be really awesome.
Yeah.
I would say though that the dynamic is interesting because especially with many of the recent Sigismar lists being focused on playing Grand Endeavor and often discounting it with a Foundry mechanic,
Hmm.
it's sometimes a little harder when it's just that not that one cost rare Foundry mechanic that we so often see.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but it's cool to see. It's a really strong unique.
Yeah, it's always fun seeing the different variants of uniques and how people can find ones that are just like so similar. I remember when the game first started off, I opened a Kickstarter box that had a unique paper herald that was 1/1 cost, had 1 stats across the board, and it had a council effect as long as I controlled the token. Um, and then I saw someone else that had almost the exact same paper herald that they responded to me when I posted in the Discord, but it just had a different supportability kind of thing. And it's just like it's just fun, like how quickly that popped up of like something so similar and just one slight difference on it as far as like the unique setup. But
Yeah,
yeah.
it's true.
All right. We do see the usual mage dancers out for the Afanis. Interestingly enough, they are not the rare mage dancers. Do you have a preference there? I don't know how much Afanis you've actually played.
I've played way too many games of Altered in general. I definitely like the common Mage Dancer actually out
Mm,
of Afanas. I think that that is one of the decks that for most stock lists is super like starved on rare slots in general. And I wouldn't want to have to cut copies of cards like Beauty Sleep from out of faction from Muna in order to enable that. Um, and it's hard to find other slots, honestly. So I personally like the common a lot. I think
mm.
this position is favoring the Afanis player very strongly, at least at the moment, considering that Sigismar has struggled to find any double advances early, and going even is always going to be better for the deck that can leverage Small Step Giant Leap. Um, and it's just the position already as well is showing so much potential for a helping hand to simply pop off on the stats across the board. So really, really strong start for the Afanis.
Yeah, we also ran into the situation there where the Sigismar was setting up for the Foundry mechanic play in order to draw a card, and had to play that 1 cost Trooper before they were able to do that, and that also allowed for the sabotage to happen coming through from the Tooth Fairy with
Mhm.
the Afanis. So, yeah, it's interesting how you're talking about with the Mage Dancer, common versus rare. Uh, Most of the time, I think I'd agree. I do like the idea behind the rare mage dancer, especially if you could get enough boosts on it. Obviously, I think it really depends on which uniques you have available for a faunus, and if you can open up rare slots because of them, and potentially put a few rare mage dancers if you can, kind of thing. But yeah, I guess it just depends. I don't think it hurts too much one way or the other.
No, I definitely agree, actually. I think that, yeah, when you know you're working with, really good, like, Spindle Harvesters is the classic, but there's a few others that have actually nearly identical effects that are almost as good or sometimes almost exactly the same. Like, you can find Sneezer Shrooms that do the crazy Spindle Harvester thing, for example.
Right.
Um, if you have those, you're a lot less reliant on generating card advantage off of your Mage Dancers, for example, so
Yeah, for sure. All right. Once again, thanks for everyone that has joined the stream and has been chatting. We are in round 4 at this point. We do have 4 undefeated players, so we may go a little bit faster into round 6 as far as the matchups are concerned. But either way, good setup here. We do see a unique Blade Dancer that has when you play a spell, if I have 1 or more boosts, I gain 1 boost. And then when I leave the exposition zone, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If it's a spell, draw a card. So yeah, going into day 3 at this point, day 4.
yeah,
Um,
that's not a bad one at all. It's also just one though that doesn't have guaranteed card advantage to it. You
yeah,
you can get it there, but it's definitely nowhere close to guaranteed. And sometimes even if you could do it, you might not want to actually reveal that information. Um, but overall definitely synergizes with what Afanis is looking to do.
Yeah, this is one of those situations like we talked about earlier, where you play the uniques you have, and
Mm.
usually you can make it work. It may not be the ideal triple spindle harvester that lets you return spells and cards all the time, but sometimes you make it work. Anyway, we do see an immediate sabotage. Um, Interestingly, targeting the Tooth Fairy, um, opposed to the Blade Dancer. Maybe they're just trying to get the Blade Dancer to be played now, opposed to letting them do a low cost Tooth Fairy. But yeah, should be interesting to see how this one turns out.
Yeah, that is definitely interesting. I would typically assume that I guess with most uniques, you're just gonna go after the unique when you sabotage something like that. In
Mhm.
this case, it could be a really heads up play actually, knowing that playing this Blade Dancer from reserve costs 1 more mana, at least, than playing a Tooth Fairy out from reserve,
Mhm.
and sometimes mana is a critical bottleneck at stages like this.
Yeah, that's the only
Um
thing I could think of offhand, but it's also a thing of like it is the common Tooth Fairy, so it is a 2 cost as well. Because you don't see that many rare Tooth Fairies for the 2/1 cost. I could see that being the case, especially if it was only a 1 mana Tooth Fairy. But uh, should be interesting. Makes me think that there's something available um, to the Sigismar to where they knew that they could handle whatever is played next. But I guess we could take a look and see what happens. They are currently up on both expeditions, and only 2 cards left in hand for the Aphanis. So we may be looking at a situation here where the Aphanis is just going to have to take a hit and potentially try to recoup some card advantage. But not quite sure.
I think they're also at the stage of the game where they can't really afford to not mana something. Aphanis is one of these decks that's just so mana hungry on critical turns, where you're really looking to maximize every last mana that you have. It's really rare that you will pass on a critical turn in the game with 1. You're typically at 0. I like the Aphanis position still, but I definitely think there's a chance here for Sigismar to go up by 1 expedition. Um, but I'm interested to see what this Blade Dancer will do. I definitely think that one of the thoughts that might be going through Hannibal's head at the moment, or a Faunus player, might be whether or not they want to be putting a spell from their hand into reserve at dusk to draw a card. That might be interesting to see.
Yep, we do see the Mage Dancer here. Plenty of 1 cost cards available for the Aphanis, and going second at this point lets them help out as far as like deciding where they want to put everything at this point. So we'll see what gets played to the potential of not getting 2-0'd here, but yeah, good amount of stats on the board for the Sigismar.
Definitely.
The anticipation can be cut with a knife. 1 card left. They can only play one thing. Maybe they're just thinking how they want to play it. I don't know.
Yeah, potentially it's where they put the counter from the Iphanis ability. Potentially it's whether, if that is a helping hand in hand, whether they might need the counters on that Mage Dancer
Right.
instead, but then it's the fleeting on the Blade Dancer means it'll go away. Could be those dynamics.
Yeah, because I mean, it's guaranteed at this point if it is the helping hand that if they put it on the Blade Dancer, it's not going to help in the sense of stat wise, but we do see the Beauty Sleep. So it was probably just what am I targeting here so that way they don't 2-0 me? Or what stat do which character do I feel more comfortable leaving around for next turn?
Yeah, makes sense. I like the decision to get off of the water expedition that they were on the companion side as well. Sigismar typically having an easier time outside of the card Baba Yaga specifically, which is stronger on forest. Otherwise, so many of their 1 cost plays have 2 in water
Mhm.
versus 1 in other stats. So I like the decision if they have to get off of an expedition to get off that one.
Yeah, all my homies hate water biomes, so um, in my early decks, that was the one that kind of plagued me the most. Of like, I just don't have enough stats in water. I don't understand what it is. But either way, a lot of cards at hand for the Sigismar at this point. Um, and like you mentioned, the Faunus is just going to have to immediately resource. And so they'll only have one card in hand at this point. So what they're able to hit with those draws is going to make a big difference in general. You almost get to the point of where you hope you don't run into the small step in one of your double draws and you need the other card, because there goes your win condition as far as like adjacent if you've already gotten rid of the one of the other ones, especially if you're only running two overall. So um, we'll see what turns out. Would be nice to see the hand. Can't do it. BGA doesn't allow it. They think we're cheaters.
That's definitely true. And we are, right? We're definitely cheating. Just sitting here having all of this information, two brains like ours cooking up crazy situations that they might be able to play in their lines, but no, it's I'm definitely wondering for Afanas what that card in hand is, and it's a conjuring seal. I was going to say that magical training or some other card draw is so critical at this point.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're just going to have such a tough time making any progress the rest of the turns of this game. I'm wondering if they will find any way to stall at least one expedition this turn, though. That does seem pretty important.
Yeah, the unique Kagir and Alchemist that we see there is if you control three or more characters, create two Ortus soldier tokens in my expedition. So it's essentially the same as your traditional Kagir and Alchemist, but you get bodies instead of stats, which is always nice as a Sigismar. One of my fun like choice based things as far as rare slots in Sigismar decks is the change that I've seen a lot lately between rare Haven Warrior and rare Khadgir and Alchemist being used a lot in Sigismar deck lists, as far as like which is the preference in general, because essentially same stats when you played from hand, right? But not
Yep.
always the case as far as from reserve and just different things overall. And a huge Keylon burst, not something you really see in Sigismar that much, but it's going to help get the 2-0 and put them in a prime spot to take the win.
Yeah, this is a really good spot for Sigismar here. I don't know what the other uniques that the Afanis player might be working with are, but as it stands, just like the Sigismar going into a turn with, I guess, two characters already in play, having just, just needing a single advance in order to get there at this point. It's going to take a lot from Afanis, and they don't have much card advantage either. Conjuring Seal definitely helped a little bit there, but it's not much. They need a lot.
More bodies we see come out. Good old Ortus Cadets. The one cost Foundry mechanic. One card is still left in hand. I gotta imagine the Sigismar can play both cards. So we'll see the Spy here and then whatever's left in hand. Um, Potentially. Yep. And 3 mana left, a lot they can do with it. We do see a unique Lady of the Lake. When I leave the expedition zone, if I have one or more boosts, you may return a spell from your reserve to your hand. It's nice, but it's not necessarily super helpful at the moment if they get advanced on, because there will be no next day. But we do see boosts come out on the Khadgir and Alchemist.
Yeah, that's true.
And ouch.
Yeah, that that not gonna do it here.
we do,
So much going on for Sigismar, and
yeah.
yeah,
We do see
really
that
well done.
Sandman making another big difference, like we saw in the previous games.
Sandman's a great card. What can I say? Who's great in Waru? Still great now.
Funny enough, it's almost better in Ortis than it is in Lyra.
That's also true.
All right, let's switch back to the two-player there. Well, we look for another game. Going back, believe that puts Usagi into the top two at this moment as far as undefeated players. Um, we do see the other top two go through. Yo takes it over Mime Sun, so we will not see a Rin and Orchid in that top two setup. Unfortunate. Just didn't quite get that festival victory, I imagine. Um, but a lot of stuff wrapping up here. Um, we do have one of the lower games still not quite done. I guess we can try to jump into table 7. We'll get one of the other AJT folks in Symbiosis that you mentioned before.
Nice. I
Um,
will jump in.
it's pretty close at this point. We'll see if we can get a little bit of play before we wrap things up on this game. Let you guys take a look at that. A lot of cards in hand for the Lindaway, or Lindive, if you want to pronounce things correctly, which I don't. Two Baba Isbas, and a lot of cards in hand for the Finn player as well.
I'm sorry, I do have to ask, is it Lindive?
I don't
I
know.
I'm pretty certain it's Lindaway, but
I,
I could be
I'm gonna
wrong.
call it Lindaway. If I'm wrong,
Alright,
sue me. You
deal.
won't,
I
but
won't.
sue me anyway. Anyway, unique Flamel. You may return a spell from your reserve to your hand, and a reserve effect of a sabotage. Interesting, unique there. We will see the good old trusty Moonlight Jellyfish coming out for the Linda Way player. And with two Isbas out, we're bound to see a sacrifice. Funny enough, we do see a Kraken in the reserve, so that's a fun little play.
Yeah, definitely. Kraken, not something that I think has had many good successes in most tournament results, but very occasionally there are situations that can come out where you just get funny expedition early, and then late game. This creates also some pretty funny situations where players just can't advance sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially when people are playing Lyra, specifically heroes, where there's sometimes just missing stats from one of the three. So pretty funny.
Yeah, it kind of falls into that category of high cost cards that we talked about earlier, similar to Anubis, where it's fun and it might help you in some niche occasions, but not very often. It can surprise folks. It definitely can surprise folks. But if you're trying to get first in a lot of events, you're probably not going to get it playing high cost cards most of the time. I don't know. One of these days, I'm gonna top an entire tournament with Itzadi, and by one of these days, I mean when it's meta after Trial by Frost, hopefully. Anyway,
Yeah,
um, let's see. So we do see an off you go hit the Moonlight Jellyfish to prevent it from being sacrificed for stats. But we do see a unique Sakuraru. From hand, you may sacrifice a character. If you do, opponent's expedition faces me, moves backwards. We'll sacrifice the Maw to do that. And if you control one or more landmarks, you may send to reserve target character with hand cost 3 or less. Interesting.
yeah, definitely interesting. You don't typically see many unique Sakurabus going around. In this case, Lindaway is the hero from Izmir that has the easy time with the landmark restriction.
Right?
So it does make sense there. I wonder. It's like niche, really good, and and I think on average it's really just similar to the common, honestly, Sakurabu.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just wondering what the deck configuration is to enable both playing Sakurabu and the Kraken. That's so interesting at high cost.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, it's funny. I was also going to mention the idea of being able to use the landmark requirements a lot easier in Lindaway. I remember even at one point because I have this Baku unique that I really like, but it has a landmark requirement for one of its abilities, and it doesn't feel good playing it, obviously. um, when I try to use that ability. I think its other abilities are pretty good by itself, like so I don't really need it, but it would be nice to have that additional setup because it's a Baku that basically when you leave, is it at dusk or when it leaves? I think it's an at dusk where you can draw and discard a card from your opponent. Um, but it also has up from play anywhere that if you have a landmark, you can send to reserve uh, a 4 or less, I think, or something like that. Um, but so it would be really nice if I could play more permanents. So I even got to a point I was playing an Acacia deck where I was running Baba Zispa just to have a low cost permanent, and I didn't want to play Katagir. But didn't work.
I
But
honestly assume that there's gonna be a lot more potentially viable permanents coming out from the next set. So I think that landmark restrictions in general might not be that bad. I know there's going to be just permanents in general that are pretty good. At least things that you can put into play that aren't necessarily landmarks. But I have a feeling that some of the landmarks are looking pretty nice as well from what we've already seen with spoilers.
yeah, for sure.
I
Let's
think
see
Argent
here.
Festival is actually going to be looking real nice thanks to the one of the new spoilers there as well. That ends up producing like a essentially you get to choose the timing by playing out characters, and you end up getting a anchored dragon, something
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
So that sort of thing, really good for festival.
yeah. What's going to be interesting to me? We do see that another off you go on the jellyfish. He just does not let him play jellyfishes. Um, the one thing with like the landmark requirements that we see in a lot of uniques right now, I'm curious to see like with the new sets as we move forward, I if we're going to see more viable landmarks or if they're going to keep on creating other forms of permanents that don't say landmark, in which case we kind of don't have ways around the landmark requirements at that point. But there has to be at some point, I guess is what I'm saying. I
Yeah,
know,
I think it's going to be some of this, some of that.
yeah. The gears themselves are interesting too. I do like gears.
Mhm.
For all you lovely folks in the chat, without disclosing too much, be sure to watch out for my channel in the next 2 weeks or so when cards get released. I may show you one. Who knows? Um, that may or may not be a gear. Who knows? Either way, let's get back into the game before I
Yeah,
get
what I
yelled at.
what I do want to note, related to the actual game that we're watching is that, both of these turns with Off You Go heading onto these Moonlight Jellyfish, I
Hmm.
think this is also largely less of a situation of them, trying to play around a sacrifice outlet, to power up Maw or something. It's more that they don't wanna have to commit their resources in as far as characters in play, until the last possible moment. And they know there's so many ways that the Lindaway player can use after use here.
Right.
They really are just trying to leverage cheap removal spells just as a, after you effect before they play out cards like Anansi. Um,
Or if
where,
they
yeah,
even have to play a 4 cost Hatter.
yeah, then and exactly. Follow up forecast Hatter, you get so much information out of seeing where the characters start coming out. And so I think Justice's goal as the Fen player there was really just trying to wait as long as possible before committing to certain expeditions.
Yep, should be interesting here. We are waiting for the Finn player to go ahead, play the Tinkerbell. They will only have 1 mana left, not a lot left to do there. The question is can the Lindaway player make something out of it? Do we see a Kraken?
Yeah,
Probably
this
not, but
no, I think this Kraken can go hard here.
good. Oh wait, yeah, it is 8 static Kraken, so yeah, they would at least tie Hero Expedition.
Yeah, I can't think of something other than like a unique that could sleep at 1 mana that would actually deal with the Kraken there.
Oh yeah, so they end up
And
just targeting the Maw and getting the double advance here.
yeah, that's huge.
Big Kraken win. Everyone should put Kraken in their decks. Call it right now.
See, one of the things that does make high cost things good is when you can use after you like 3 times before you have
Yeah.
to do anything else. When that happens, yeah, it feels really awesome playing the Kraken. So I can definitely, see why it's in the list given those sort of effects. If you can get out multiple Baba's Isba and still be alive in the game, that's super sweet.
We get a God Bless America by A. It's Mark in the chat. Um, Oh, it's because Symbiosis is from the US. Okay. I was like, all right. Anyway, um, let's go back here. See if we got any more games. Let me switch back so you guys can look at my face and Keelan Elemental's face. Um, Back to the front here. We are on
We're
round
down to just
five.
2 undefeated players left, interestingly enough.
On round five, I think we may have looked at both of them already, but let's go ahead and take a look. There still
Yeah,
will be a round six, I think, but we
I
can still watch this.
I don't think we saw Yo on Afanas yet. I could be wrong. But I know Yo actually took down my event. What was it? Tuesday afternoon.
Nice.
Yeah, that's yesterday for you guys. I just looked at the calendar, saw Thursday, and I was like, wait, was that 2 days ago? No, it was yesterday afternoon. And that was also his birthday. So pretty cool winning a altered tournament on your birthday.
Oh
But
boy.
really solid Afanas play there if we want to check that out. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not
Weird.
surprised that they're doing well in this tournament so far.
Yeah. What did you give him for his birthday for winning? Anything special?
Yeah, he got a booster pack
Hmm.
digitally, but unfortunately, it was not better than the spindle harvesters that he has in his deck
Nah.
currently.
Unfortunate. We do have the Aphanis versus Sigismar, Usagi versus Yo, getting set up here. Interesting enough, on day one, we do see the immediate beauty sleep of one of the Baba Yagas.
That's the sort of thing that you can really afford to do when you do have crazy uniques as a Faunus. Otherwise, it is definitely a feels bad sort of scenario, but it was interesting. The Sigismar also had to lead out and start off the turn by playing out the Baba Yaga, which is much worse. There being a Sneezer Shroom that is also, higher in stats than a Baba Yaga um, for the turn two, and with an Expedition lead on Afanas, that is insane. That's a really nice start for Afanas, actually. It is really important, though, for them that they are able to uh, dig towards either uniques or mage dancers in this sort of spot. Mage dancers will help them shore up the next couple of turns and prevent many easy double advances out of Sigismar. However, it's also definitely the case that you're looking to set up with your uniques with an Ephanis deck as quickly as you can.
And for the folks at home watching, I believe we do have a hand bug being shown for the Aphanis player that they should have 3 cards in hand, I believe. But now you're aware of it as things get a little bit fuzzy. Um, Either way, we do see a Legat out. Fun card to play in Sigismar. I think we're seeing a lot more bureaucrats being played in Sig. Um, that definitely showing some success in general.
Yeah, it turns out the bureaucrats are actually pretty good, regardless of whether they're put asleep or not. They're just good cards. I think, especially in Sigismar, the Monolith Legate being common is actually a really nice option. Orda's Attorney being rare, super good card, don't get me wrong. It's just yet again, Sigismar is one of these decks. We're seeing this with most of the best decks in the game at the moment. Actually, they are so starved on rare slots for really powerful things to do, and typically, so many of those rare slots for Sigismar are going to really good one-cost characters. Like sometimes it's the Frog Prince, but it's almost always a set of Foundry Mechanics and Ordis Troopers. So those rare slots are just really difficult. So it can be a lot easier to slot in something like Legate compared to something like Attorney. Attorney typically involves some other concessions with other things that you're looking to do in the deck. It's really unlikely, for example, that we would see Kill on Burst as removal coming out from a Sigismar who's playing Ordis Attorney.
Yeah, I think we saw that one off there in that previous matchup that was a little bit surprised to see, but cool to see nonetheless. It actually brings into the idea of as we see a rare Frog Prince as well from the Sigismar. The idea of what I was talking about earlier between the Haven Warrior and the Khadgiran Alchemist. And the one way that I looked at it, as far as like why the Alchemist might be more of an advantage, and I figured this out at one point, I think when I was casting a celebration tournament for the Exalts folks with a guy trying, who was also in the chat at some point, was that it almost opens up a rare slot for your one costs, because essentially you would have a one cost from reserve with the Cadgear and Alchemist, whereas you may have not felt like you had enough one cost if you had to remove um, a rare slot for something else, kind of thing, right?
I
Um,
think it's also like yeah, you're definitely right on that. It does help having additional one cost in the deck in general, and it is just good stats actually for
mhm.
playing a category in Alchemist. That is a big like mid rangey card. That's really nice. But it's also just playing something for one out of Sigismar, a deck that can typically have uniques that either gain boosts or boost your entire team when you play characters, or sometimes it's draw cards when you play characters, but most often just produce more and more tokens when you play characters. The more one cost that you can leverage in those turns, the better.
Yeah, for sure. Just a one cost in general is a big thing, but you do run into the type of thing where you mentioned that sometimes it feels like you have to cut some of those rare slots, especially when you're putting in things like Attorney and potentially Keelan Burst, which you don't see a lot of, kind of thing. But interesting to see nonetheless. Fun to watch this uh, particular Sigismar do well, even with a different type of setup.
Yeah, it's interesting though. Like, I mean, the legates are specifically really nice when you're playing into like Traced, for example, right?
Mm.
Getting a sabotage at dusk, so nice in early stages of the game. But interestingly, in this specific matchup, despite having gotten multiple sabotages off, both times the reserve was already so overdrawn that like that it I mean, there's still two cards in reserve at the end of the day, and they're
Right.
both spells, which is exactly what Afanis wants to be doing. So overall, not getting much value out of it, unfortunately, for the Sigmar player. Um, the what is nice for the Sigmar player though is that Ordus Attorney definitely got a lot of value there. They're doing pretty well on the card advantage end. However, there are big things in play for Afanas at the moment, and they are one expedition ahead at the moment as well. And the pressure is really on for Sigismar to start finding double advances before Small Step Giant Leap becomes a major factor.
Yeah, kind of like you mentioned before, it always hurts when you're not up on a faunus in on the tumult. So we'll see how the six mark can come back from that. They do have 5 mana here, and we see that Keelan burst that we saw previously. So the rare allocation for Usagi is definitely different than what we're normally used to seeing from Sigismar deck lists. But it does help there, removing that big statted Baba Yaga, although can just replay it again. But I assume there's another 2 cost here that they have something that'll help them out to at least advance one. Sagi taking a think, and we see that teamwork training. Gonna target the one character that they can target and be the mage dancer. That's not true. That he could have targeted his own characters for some reason, but don't see that often.
It's also true. That is pretty rare.
I remember I did that one time at a local just because I wanted to get the effect of a bureaucrat not advancing, and it was definitely the wrong play to do, but I just wanted it, and I thought it would be funny. But
Well,
either
the
way,
classic was removing your own Isatok while playing Waru.
mm,
That was a great feeling. That
yeah,
was yeah, really, really nice. But actually, it's also funny. Sometimes Navenka has these situations where they're like kind of okay with rolling the die and hitting a one on an early turn because they could just replay their thing on the different expedition.
yeah.
Um, it's funny how sometimes putting your own character in reserve isn't the end of the world. Often is. Sometimes nope.
It just doesn't feel good because you're also using teamwork training, which is also a nice one to use against the opponent, you know. But if it helps you win, why not, right? And yeah, a guy trying. I put it in chat, but this is the undefeated players. We're in round 5 though, so technically we'll still have another round. So there'd be the potential that we don't have any undefeated players, but who knows?
This spot is looking so good for Yo, though, with Usagi having to play out that early Sandman. And I say early both in the sense of uh, it's towards the beginning of their turn instead of potentially sleeping something that has had time to grow a little bit more and really show off where the threats are going to be for Ifanas. But it's also just so likely that Ifanas is going to find another advance here this turn. And at this point, small step, giant leap is becoming a major factor. That Sandman really ideally wants to be closing out expeditions entirely, and it looks like it might not be here.
Yeah, I think at this point we see it a lot where it's a situation that the Aphanis is just fine going 1 for 1 for the rest of the game here and just setting themselves up. We do see the small step giant leap go to reserve, but if we take a look at the spindle harvester, that's a unique that's in play. At dusk, if I have 1 or more boosts, you may return a spell from your reserve to your hand. So we may see that return, or we may see the magical training return. Either way. Um, uh, Good setup for the Aphanis.
If they want to advance, though, they do have to find something other than just this magical training from the reserve to play.
Mhm.
It needs to be an off you go, or like a helping hand, or beauty sleep, even. Um, if they want to keep advancing here. It could be that they just prefer the card advantage simply, but I think at this point they really, really want to get an expedition win here.
Yeah, we don't see any off you goes in the discard pile, so there is a potential that we could see something from hand. And yep, what do you know? There's an off you go.
Yeah, good timing on that one. Yeah, at this point, being 19 cards through the deck, very likely they will have seen at least one. So, yep, that shoots down a Ozma temporarily, and that will give them an expedition win on the hero side. And they're already well set up for next turn where they're going to have two characters in play and a bunch of cards between hand and reserve to put additional stats onto their characters with. The Spindle Harvesters is really strong.
So the fact that he decided to return the small step, um, does that make you think that he's probably already maned 1 small step and he definitely wants to keep that one and not get it sabotaged?
Um, I don't think it necessarily means that the other one entered mana. It definitely means that the second card in the hand was not a small step giant leap.
Yeah.
Um, it's really a situation though where they know for a fact that they want their game plan for the rest of this game, as long as it goes, to be simply take a single expedition win, small step giant leap and win. They don't want any situation where one that they're forced to play it this turn, or two where it can otherwise get sabotaged. Those are the critical things to avoid. So just by picking it up, they're saying, "I know how I'm going to win the game. You need to find a solution right now."
Yeah, and they also interestingly decided to get rid of the off you go, opting to keep the meditation training and the magical training, both training cards. I imagine they're thinking that they're potentially just going to want to use the meditation training to keep out one of their characters in general, to keep having more pressure in the unlikely case that they are not able to get an advance in small step. But either way, we'll see what how it turns out. Either way, not looking too hot for the Sigismar with Usagi.
Actually, honestly, at this point, the meditation training is simply a 3 mana put one boost on a character.
Yeah.
The next turn is essentially irrelevant because Sigismar doesn't have ways to interact with Small Step Giant Leap in the deck. Um, and therefore, the only turn that matters now for the Aphanis player is this turn here. They're not looking to anchor things. If there is somehow a world where there are multiple removal spells that take down these characters, the Spindle Harvesters can be replayed. Now, with a Helping Hand coming out, the Mage Dancer can also easily get replayed. It's going to be virtually impossible to prevent at least one expedition win here for
So
Sigismar,
so what
unfortunately.
you're saying is give Sigismar discard.
I don't think you can quote me as saying that, but I'm sure you could do some interesting editing to make it really sound like I think that Sigismar needs a buff. If you really need some YouTube content, that's
Yeah.
definitely an option.
Give Sigismar a buff. Got it. Um, But yeah, I mean, we do know Usagi's a bit unorthodox with at least one Keylon burst on the deck list, which would technically could be helpful. But at this point, we got a second Mage Dancer out, and it'd be hard for he'd be hard pressed to win that side too, especially if we see more spells being played, which we know there are a bunch in reserve. We do see that Kagir, an alchemist that we've seen before, produces a bunch of tokens in its expedition. But yeah,
Now, the other thing is that if this was a lower caliber Afanis player, I would definitely think there's maybe some chance for like boosts to go on a incorrect character or something, and
mm,
give a potential chance for either removal or like another Sandman to find a expedition win here. But as it stands, I think it's really looking just like a double advance to win. I don't think there's going to be any mistakes whatsoever made from Sigismar. I'm sorry, I mean from the Afanis here. Sigismar, I don't think he has the opportunity to make any errors with what he's doing because he's simply just down to one card in hand, just the one Sandman from reserve, but is also on incorrect expeditions, and so it doesn't block the Afanas whatsoever. So it's just sort of unfortunate timing there.
yeah, we do see that Keylon burst, so that means we know they're running at least two Keylon bursts, which is very interesting in and of itself. But like you mentioned, still a lot available to the Afanis. Just going to straight up play that Mage Dancer once again. Sigismar has to pass, and we'll definitely see a spell played here that'll lock things down.
Yeah, impressive performance there. Definitely, Spindle Harvester unique doing a lot of work there. But overall, just the early game plan I think was just worked out a little bit better for Afanas. The early turn having to lead off on Baba Yaga for Sigismar, it's not like the worst feeling in the world having to play out a Baba Yaga the first turn of the game. That is a nice thing to play. But when your opponent then prevents you from advancing that turn and also advances themselves, and that opponent is playing Afanis, where they will have access to Small Step Giant Leap and can potentially stall you out on other turns instead of letting you advance here or there. And yeah, there's just no way to generate the advantage that Sigismar needs to beat a Small Step Giant Leap game plan.
Yep, and so interesting. We'll see the one Faunus be the undefeated setup here, and Funman in the chat is saying, "Is Yo going to be the two-time win in a row?" I don't know. We'll find out. Technically, there still is one more round, and Yo could lose, and we could cause the good old-fashioned BGA determined tiebreaker by Elo fun, which everyone likes to see.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
true. I mean, so it will start with the opponent's points thing, though,
yeah,
and there are multiple players who actually are at similar numbers there to Yo. So
yeah.
it is actually very much not guaranteed still for Yo, despite being the only undefeated player left. There is a chance, especially actually, yeah, at this point, I think they're favored, but it's still definitely possible for them to lose if they were to drop the last round here. So, yo, they know what the goal is here. If they win the last round, they definitely get it. That would be the back to back for sure. But otherwise, they have to just hope that the tiebreaker goes well for them.
So I'm gonna jump into table seven. We got an AJT matchup against each other. Um, we'll see how the teammates fare. It's a Finn versus a Traced. Um, as we wait for round six.
We really haven't seen much Trace today,
Yeah,
which is interesting. I think there's always a few names who are regularly playing Trace that are often hitting top tables, but I think it's been one of these situations where after Robin Hood was nerfed, there were a ton of people playing Traced, and at this point, we're well and truly past the point where everyone's looking to get on the deck just to win everything. People are trying to tech against Traced, and now I think it's even going to swap back a little bit to people trying to tech against more Sigismar than they are Traced. Um, but yeah,
yeah.
definitely still a good number of Traced players out there, though. It's not uncommon to see them by any stretch of the imagination.
And honestly, with all the one cost stuff out there, let's bring back Robin Hood again. Come on, Moru players. There's plenty of good Robin Hood cards out there. Like, I want to see a three unique Robin Hood deck in Waru that lets you
Well,
have little side effects, but also has that you're not focused on the tax as much anymore, but it's a nice little additional effect this time, you know?
Actually,
So
that is what I was going to say. Like double tax Robin Hoods, like the unique Robin Hoods earlier that were selling for hundreds or sometimes even thousands.
mhm,
Um, those are terrible now, like completely
yeah.
unplayable. But there were a lot of other like pretty good effect outside of the tax Robin Hood uniques that were like one or two cost higher even
Mhm.
that I feel like almost have gotten some chance at life that they would have never had previously. um, where they're now actually playable for other effects. You don't want to play that as a unique because of the Robinhood tax. That does not work anymore. Robinhood is completely dead if you're actually trying to tax people with it. But uniques that are potentially drawing you cards or creating some other incremental advantage when you, I don't know, do anything, those can actually be a little bit better. And some dynamic we're seeing a bit with Waru now is that the bureaucrat count is a little bit lower, which means that having the extra bureaucrats in the deck does make it that much more consistent.
Yeah, I actually have a Robin Hood unique now that's a 5/6, I think, um, that has like the traditional Robin Hood ability, right? But it also has the like one of my favorite abilities that you see on Robin Hoods are the when a character joins your expedition, you draw a card kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
And it's not even non-token character, it's character. So you get a draw immediately on Waru ability and then whatever else you want to play kind of thing. So you see the non-traditional bureaucrats like you play cadets, draw two cards kind of thing, right? Um,
Yep.
but yeah, that's one of my favorite like non-tax Robin Hood abilities that I've seen work really well before. You can essentially in one turn or one day draw like 5, 6 cards, right? And as long as you don't go too far behind, that puts you in a pretty good spot. But yeah.
I also just want to say this Anansi unique that is currently in reserve for
Mhm.
Matata, our traced player, is absolutely absurd.
You may put a
Um,
card from your hand in reserve. If you do, I gain one boost for each card in your reserve. And
Yeah,
it's from
that is
anywhere.
incredible because yeah, exactly. That trigger ability from is a when played from anywhere, and it has that discount down to just one cost from reserve. That is so good for activating an early traced ability. And then even towards like later stages of the game, that actually does represent a relatively sizable body for just one mana. That's a
Yeah.
really nice one.
And we do see the Traced one advance away with a Bravos Bastion out, and we may see that Nancy help out here in securing one of the expedition advances. I mean, obviously, they're definitely going to play the Lyra Chronicler for the hero side. I mean, it's perfect for stats, right?
I mean, possibly, but the thing that is interesting though is that oftentimes that even when it's on correct statted expeditions, sometimes you'll see people resupply with it anyway
Yeah,
because it just costs 3 mana.
yeah.
Traced ability is already active, so there's less incentive to do that. But in this case, 3 mana is a ton, and they're working with 2 Haven Bravos Bastions in play, so the more small things you can play versus something that costs 3. I mean, in what world are we in where saying that something that costs 3 is expensive? But that's expensive.
It's
Um,
expensive and traced is the
yeah,
joke I was trying to make. Like other than that, you can almost guarantee that if you're resupplying, you're probably going to hit something that's two or less. Uh,
it's true.
in most worlds, if not, you're hitting something else that you can use, kind of thing. And yeah, it looks tempting there, but especially when you just need to win one expedition, there's really no point in using 3 mana, especially if you can slow play the other side. Granted, Finn also has 2/1 cost acapella trainings that they can just play for fun as an after you, but either way, which they are going to play for fun. But either way, we're going to see a lot of stats on the board for Traced. Double Haven's out. A lot of stats in general. Wonder here if they're going to play the Anansi just to take advantage of the more cards in reserve, um, or if they're going to resupply first. Yeah, we're going to see a resupply first, and then maybe the Anansi because they'll get 3 boosts off of it.
There is, like, a world, though, where there could be one of these uniques from the Fen player that, like, sleep all of the characters in one of the expeditions or something like that. But even then, that's really gonna struggle here because just at this point in the game, there's just so much, stats from every single card that comes out from Trace, and every single card that comes out from Traced is just gonna cost less than all of the cards that are being played by Fen. Ah, such a hard spot. Yeah, it's just the fact that these 2 Kill-On Elementals are both playable here now still, totally ridiculous. Super good spot.
Yeah, and Finn did have a lot of interaction available to them with the Sandman and the Off You Go, but unfortunately, it will not be enough. And we will see Matata from the AJT group take the win over Justice.
Yeah, well done to our Trace player there. Their uniques look super sweet. I love the low to the ground configuration. Yeah, high power Trace gameplay. Nice.
Gotta love Traced. All right, let me switch back here. Take that off. Do a little refresh so that way I don't get too much weird things happening. All right, are we in round 6 yet? We sure
We
are.
are.
Question is, do we watch the Yo matchup against Street Drummer to see if Street Drummer can take Yo down? Probably, right? I guess technically that is the final.
That is yeah, we could either do that or we could look at one of the 4 and 1 players who has a chance of matching Yo's opponent's points. Um, or like,
Yes.
potentially beating Yo in a tiebreaker, but I'm up for anything.
Yeah, so we have Usagi and Rikito again playing as 4 and 1s, and then we also have Mime Sun and Kurana playing as a 4 and 1. So it'll matter for that table 2 and table 3. It's basically table 1, 2, and 3 are going to be the deciders at this point. Um, let's see here. Dun, dun, dun.
Mimesun does temporarily have better tiebreakers than YOLO, I believe, so that would be the most interesting table otherwise.
All
Or I'm
right,
sorry, not YOLO, Yo.
let's go and take it. That is also a Rin and Orchid deck, so we may see a quick game anyway.
Sure.
Um, let's see here. Come on, BGA, load faster. Oh, BGA. I'll switch that over so you folks can watch BGA load.
I'm pretty certain that it's just these hand to mana decisions in the early game that don't let spectators in until that's done.
Which is
So
weird
it
because
looks
that's
like
all
they start, but yeah.
is because that's a fun decision to watch. I like watching that, but whatever.
Yeah, when there's nothing on the board and both players are just staring there and you have to talk for a minute and a half.
Yeah. So we are in game. It will be a Sigismar that my son is up against. Um, see if we get a quick festival victory potentially. We will see the aloe vera come out right away. Um, but there is still 2 mana left, and we will see the cadets that will block the advance on the forest, which will not allow the Rin to do some milling.
Yep, that's true. In this case, though, it's still an okay-ish start for Rin managing to get an expedition there. Definitely preferable to no expedition. There is a chance that they are able to simply play out characters to win still. I think it's a lot more common with Rin than like a aggressive Argent Festival configuration. But also not seeing an optimal expedition on that hero side for the Rin ability.
Yep.
So I think they're really just looking to play out a Lyra Festival, hopefully for them this turn, otherwise as soon as possible, and find a way to block some expeditions for Sigismar.
Yeah. Alternatively, we do see the immediate aloe vera with an anchored play, um, potentially trying to at least get to the water biome there for next turn. I don't think they're expecting to advance on forest at this point, and just taking their lumps a little bit. Um, but we'll see. Sigismar taking a think, trying to decide if they want to try to block, and they're just going to give it up. Interesting. Opting
Oh,
for
that
resources.
that is really interesting. The thing that's tough about that is that that does give the forest progression for the Rin and Orchid ability,
Yeah.
which does let them draw a card, then put a card from hand in reserve. If they don't have Lyra Festival yet in hand, that's really nice to for digging for it. Otherwise, if they do have it already, it's really nice for potentially finding a way to anchor this aloe vera for a second turn in a row. Um, so I wonder if it would have just been better to just fire off that Ortis Cadets and then hope you draw better things for card advantage. But as it stands, I think they're just trying to set up to get a guaranteed double advance for virtually every subsequent turn.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard, and also a lot of people are not super familiar like playing against Rin and Orchid. It's oftentimes the case that people will think, okay, well they're going to be advancing, and they're currently on a forest tile, and so that means that playing anything into it that doesn't prevent them from advancing isn't enough. But in
Yeah.
this case, playing Ortis Cadets out would prevent the advancing on the forest stat, which is what Rin and Orchid cares about. So you never know there. It could have been heads up play. It could have been not heads up play. You never know, really. I would assume though that they're just trying to set up for a really strong turn over this turn and the next turn to try to close out the game in 2 turns.
Yeah, that's one of the thing I was going to ask you what that move told you in general. My initial thought would have been that they didn't have much in hand as far as characters to play, and they were holding on to some type of removals, and they wanted to hold on to the cadets in order to play something next turn. But they do end up having a rare spy available to them to just immediately sabotage the spindle actually because they don't want to have to deal with paying extra for teamwork training. I have to imagine.
I
So
think you're totally correct on them having removal here. I think it's pretty telegraphed with the Orda Spy going after the Spindle when the Kodama there is actually very threatening in this specific spot. Um, you know that they're just trying to enable some lines that can counter potential festival game plan by having removal up that can actually hit characters in play. So it's almost certainly teamwork training that they're working with. Anything else is just going to go after the festival anyway, most probably. So they don't care so much about Spindle for that reason, unless they're holding on to removal that only goes after characters.
so a fun little Esmeralda there. If you put a card from your hand in reserve, you may resupply, and if you control three or more characters, target character gains anchored. So it has a fun little Parvati effect with a requirement.
Yeah, that's actually pretty sweet.
It is from hand, so it's not from anywhere. But for 3 mana, I'll take it.
I think actually the most interesting line of that is the first ability, where typically with most characters, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If you do, is typically a downside. In this case, that's very much upside for Rin and Orchid. They're leveraging so many different things that have reserve effects to either give anchored or to play something with fleeting if need be that is actually just really, really good. Playing that from hand, anchoring something, and putting in something else that lets you anchor something else, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think the only times where I like seeing that ability is with the fun, like a unique Moon of Merchants for trace decks, when you're just trying to buff up those counters a little bit. But
Mhm.
other than that, yeah, it looks really good, and we do see the Daughter of Yggdrasil get to go to reserve as well, so won't give the opponent a draw, and you get to play a 3 cost 5/5/3 if they want to. So interesting that we see that the Rin is ahead above the Sigismar and maintaining a good aggro position that we wouldn't normally see as far as like the Lyra Festival. But we do know, like you said previously, that the Rin is a lot better in an aggro position than we might see for like an Arjun or something.
I mean, we actually, as far as tournament history is concerned, most of the Rins that have done well historically, at least, have often been not on a Lyra Festival game plan at all.
Yeah.
They've been more tempo Rin and just leveraging the fact that some people aren't going to be aware of the fact that they might not be playing Lyra Festival. But cards like Daughter of Yggdrasil, if you can give that anchored, just incredibly overstated in the early game, And then using that Rin and Orchid ability to just create incremental advantage over time, more and more chances to anchor things that are already in play. It's a super awesome way of playing the game, especially when people are scared of the potential festival win. You often do have to concede expeditions in early and mid game if you want to hold up removal.
Yeah, shout out to Reified with the tempo aggro Rin and Orchid in the early days.
Exactly. Yep.
Um, we do see the companion side getting hit up pretty big there for the Rin and Orchid, especially with the aloe vera out blocking water. And we do see the Ozma come from the Sigismar in order to keep drawing, and teamwork training's gonna hit that aloe vera to prevent the water block. But they are still ahead on the hero side, so they will get to do a little milling. But we do get a situation where that will allow the reserve to be a little bit overloaded, but not too much.
Yeah, it's also just good card selection at this stage in the game to be able to get the draws here off of that expedition win. It's also they're in a good spot to be able to do so the next turn as well if they're playing onto the companion side to try to win it. Um, so at this point, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they keep in the reserve still here, whether they're prioritizing the Mowgli for either just 1 mana for 3 stats on Forest, or whether they're prioritizing Mowgli for the Anchored from reserve ability here.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting to see where that goes, likely towards the early stages of the turn. Um, but yeah, this is, I think, good spot for Rin and Orchid, interestingly enough.
Yeah, not surprised to see the Capella go out there. You don't get the effect that you want as far as putting hand to reserve to play it quite easily, but not too bad having the Mowgli out there, like you mentioned in general. Um, so, as an avid Arjun player that likes to play the festival side of things and get people really upset and salty during the previous setups,
Mhm,
um,
mhm.
do you mana Lyra Festival here if you have something other cards in hand that you want to keep, especially with being up and just planning on maybe winning from the tumult.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm a Rin and Orchid player in a spot like this where I'm 2 expeditions away from winning and ahead of your opponent, I would
Mhm.
absolutely be manoing Lyra Festival at this point. Um, unless I had, like, the most obvious win in the world in hand with the ability to play around 1 removal spell.
Yeah.
There are situations where you're able, at this stage in the game, to play around a single removal spell, at which point, yeah, you're keeping the Lyra Festival for that. It's totally worth it. But in general here, I'm loving the spot just with the aggro game plan, that Rin currently has. Just like look at the suffering that this state is right now. Like being the Sigismar player, having to look at this Mowgli that you know can be played if need be, and if not need be, they'll just anchor something with it for the next turn. That's insane. It's such a nice spot for
Whew.
Rin and Orchid, and
And
Beauty
Beauty
Sleep is
Sleep,
just gonna take the game.
nuts. Yeah, big play with the daughter. Big stat stick. You're fine with giving them the card because they're already low on mana anyway. And then another good 4/4/4 character with the Cernanos p- matched up with that Beauty Sleep is going to let him take it. Unfortunately, I believe Yo is going to win. Not unfortunately, but we won't see the fun BGA setup there where we get a decider factor of potentially a Rin and Orchid taking the whole thing. But a good result for Mime Son nonetheless. Let's go ahead and switch back real quick to see if we can see any more games. I'm not sure if we will or not, but we can take a look. Um,
Yeah, that was amazing. I'm just stunned. That was really impressive Rin and Orchid gameplay there.
they,
But yeah, it's just also very impressive to see Yo taking back-to-back, tournament wins there. That's, really solid.
yeah, Yo went through the game quick there, beating out Street Drummer. We do still have some games being played, so we can take a look. Is there anyone in particular you want to take a look at that maybe we haven't seen or you know is a fun character in general that we want
Um,
to take a look at?
hold on one second, I'm trying to see who is still playing. Nah, it's your pick. Go for it.
All right. We've seen Usagi Rikito a bit. We saw El Wiwi, Carthay and Hannibal. We've seen a lot of. I feel like everyone we've kind of taken a look at already.
Living Plane and Josito, table 9.
Yeah, I don't remember any of them, so I guess we could take a look at them. Hopefully, it's a fun matchup. Um,
Tasia Tasia.
Double Tasia.
Oh, and interestingly, one of the Tasias is playing with a Loki unique.
Oh, that's fun. All right, so we can pull that one up, and it looks like Funman says El Wiwi's in a good game there. I can take a look at that here shortly and see if we want to switch over to. But for now, I'm just gonna pull this one up for all you folks. I
It
got two.
does look like this one's almost certainly about to end, though.
Yeah,
One of the Tasias is ahead on board and is about to win with a single advance expedition-wise.
yeah. And we can't even see the Loki be played because it's too much. But fun to have on there. It even has the flavor text.
It's true.
Oh, and the other one's running a rare Loki too. Interesting Loki matchup in Tasia. That's
That
fun.
is really interesting to see and really uncommon.
But yeah, we're probably looking at a win here for Josito. So I'm gonna go ahead and back out real quick for you
Pull
folks.
up pull up the El Wee game, yeah.
This let's see what we got going there.
I'll keep you updated in case something incredible happens in a turnaround, but
I won't hold my breath on that, but we'll take a look here. El Wee Wee game, table 4. Let me pull that up for everybody. Let's full screen it. Go there. Turn it on for the screen for everyone. Take a look. We have the traced one advance away as well, but a bunch of resources for both sides. Be curious to see if the Finn is able to keep up here. The trace does not have a haven available, and is able to play huge Anansi with 4 cards in reserve. So we may look at the Finn being able to hold off the trace potentially. Not
notably, the fact that the Fen here has a cost reducer in reserve is so important for their ability to stay alive this turn. Um, Also, Hathor gives a lot of additional flexibility there. If they do realize that they need to pick up again their unique Anansi, for example, to try to have a chance of rolling a die to gain a boost. It's a bizarre effect, but it's one where if when they play it from hand, they can roll a die, and on a 4+, it gets 1 boost for each card in their reserve. If there is a world where they need something for 2 mana there, Hathor could potentially pick it up. I think that's probably the main use of Hathor at this point, considering how Trace is just on water expeditions. So they might need raw stats on water, in which case being able to pick something up with Hathor is great, having cost reducer is great, but the situation does look very good for Traced despite not having a Haven in play.
Yeah, it's pretty big that the Haven is not in play because the Frankenstein doesn't have as big of an effect. Still a 2 cost 3/3/3, so it's good as far as stats is concerned, but will not be able to resupply something that like a potential 1 cost that they would like to see in general. But we'll see where the Finn goes with this. They have 4 mana left, and they are the first to play in this scenario of like mana availability. So we'll see if they decide to go with something bigger, another 2 costs. They reduce the cost that you mentioned before because they also have 3 in hand and another Anansi. All right. Um, 1 mana left, and so they can play the unique Anansi as well at this point, right?
Yep, that's true. I think they're trying to figure out a way to play around Kelon Burst here, but that's just so difficult. It's interesting. I can't help but wonder if they playing the Anansi onto the hero side there, where they're already blocking it reasonably well with the Lyra Scald that they had. Hooked definitely explains why they would do something like that. But yeah, Kellon Burst is just going to likely take this one down. Again, unless there's some sort of one cost unique here that can sleep and put stats into play.
Yeah.
Uh, that is possible, but really unlikely.
See, return here
No, it's
to.
beautiful. They picked up the hooked, they cost reduce, and they hooked their Anansi to the other side. It's beautiful.
It's gorgeous. Why didn't we see it before?
Oh,
It was all on the table
Awiwi
for
the
us.
master is an absolute master of this deck. Hooked is sort of an uncommon include in a lot of these Fen decks. And of course, this turn doesn't feel great for the Fen player, considering they are going to go down to 2 cards left in their reserve. They've used so many resources, and the opponent is still in a nearly game-winning position, but they're alive. And considering that, yeah, the Traced player had so many things to play that turn, had the removal at the right time, and still couldn't find a win there, that does feel good.
Yeah, we're also in a scenario. Take a quick look at the discard pile. We do see one Haven in there, so it was removed at some point, potentially by a Cloth Cocoon. So the question is, with 10 cards left in the deck, if we see another Haven get played out here from the Traced, um, and just keep on cycling utility, because unfortunately for the Finn, you always have to mana, and we do in fact see another Haven out with 2 Dr. Frankensteins available, but we see the immediate Cloth Cocoon say no thank you, which is good, but now has to block 2 Frankensteins and a Traced ability.
Yeah, that is easier said than done, especially considering that this Anansi that is now in reserve, unless the card in hand is something that's cheap that would go directly to reserve, like another copy of Magical Training, won't outstat one of the Anansis if played on companion side. Or, I'm sorry, one of the Dr. Frankensteins if played on companion side. And you also have to assume here that the Trace is going to have at least one more card to play outside of these Dr. Frankensteins. That's a hard spot. I think there are cards that could be potential outs still. Potentially like Twinkle Twinkle could be of good use here. But yeah, it's really tough.
Yeah, and a good static character too coming out there with the Kelon Elemental and what they need to advance and block at this point too. So not looking ideal for the Finn player. Guarantee this is one of the situations where they probably wouldn't have wanted to mana if they could have helped it. And we do see that third Haven Bravo Bastion come out, which is going to make it even that much harder for the Finn, if not improbable slash impossible.
Yeah, that's a rough run. Now every card in reserve for the traced player, it does outstat Anansi on that side. At this point, I can't imagine it's anything but trivial for Trace to just play things onto that side and win. Um, I, I, there could be more surprises for us. It could be hooked. There is the Twinkle Twinkle I was mentioning earlier, but at this point, yeah, just the fact that any of these characters that get played will outstat, that should be enough.
Yep. Maybe if we didn't see the Haven come out, there would have been a chance. But not in this scenario, unfortunately. And we do see another one cost, so another easy play there for the Trace player. Just gonna put the cherry on top, add some more stats just for fun. And yeah, still a fun game. Thanks for saying that one, Fun Man. We got to see a fun little Finn play there. Unfortunately, didn't let them win the game, but made it that much closer.
That was a really good one, actually.
All right. We may be through the entire tournament at this point, but we can still take a look.
Yes, it is. It is done.
We are done. So yeah, let me go ahead and full screen this, and we can go over to this so we can take a look. We do have Yo taking the victory. First placed, double winner here. A fun Mime Sun Rin and Orchid doing it for all the festival and non-meta Tasia players out there. Taking second with only one loss. Usagi in third. Um, and Originality, who we just saw playing, in fourth. Rounding out the top eight, we have Rukito that we got to see a little bit as well. I don't believe we got to see Mardion at sixth place, but no big deal there. It's Mark, seventh place, and Carthray at eighth place. Any surprises that we're looking at here in the top eight that strike your fancy?
Definitely the Rin and Orchid taking second place in the tournament there. Absolutely, really cool. But overall, yeah, I'm definitely not surprised to see Yo taking the tournament down. That's a super strong player playing a super competitive deck, super competitive uniques. Overall, just yeah, really really solid and played his heart out. Really really good job.
Yep. Good tournament overall, I would have to say. Think one of the bigger surprises is not necessarily in the top eight setup, but just in general is the amount of not seeing trace players kind of thing. So that was definitely a bit of a surprise. You used to seeing a bunch of them, but I think it's a lot like you mentioned earlier, where we had that initial influx post Robin Hood errata, and now it's kind of tapering off a little bit, the same way that we saw a lot of the Finn players taper off, and seeing a good healthy supply of Tasia across the board, Sigismar, and of course we get to see some Afanis as well. If I'm putting my bets on the most popular heroes these days, I think those three are probably up there on the list.
It was nice though getting to see a few other heroes as well. There was some Bravos in the tournament. There were some non-traced Axiom characters. Oh, sorry, heroes rather. There was a good bit of Fen as well. I do like seeing, sort of the resurgence of these less popular heroes now that not no longer in the Robin Hood metagame where we would see a little bit more of these different things. The early phases where everyone was playing Traced, it seemed, and a lot of Sigismar as always, are less so going that way at this point. People are really trying to tech with different decks. People are, taking their favorite things that were always their favorites and finding ways to make them work in the new metagame. So that's really satisfying, I think.
For sure. And yeah, I mean, past that, I just want to say thanks to everyone that attended the stream. Want to thank you as well, the Kelon guy, for joining me post your own event yesterday. If anyone wants to see some more or play in some more tournaments, be sure to check out the Kelon guy's bi-weekly events on Tuesday, correct?
That's it. It's every other Tuesday. So next Tuesday will not be happening, but the Tuesday after. So you'll have a bit of time. But yeah, feel free if any of you see my username somewhere on Discord, you can feel free to message me for info if you do not know where that is at already. But yeah, thank you for having me. I love showing up to commentate, regardless of it being middle of the night for me. It's always a good time watching some altered content, chatting about it. Yeah, it's lots of fun.
Definitely. Glad to have you. And again, want to thank everyone that joined. We'll probably be wrapping up here, ending the stream. But good to have one full stream of A.W.O.L in on my channel, at least, that isn't messed up by the good old fashioned BGA issues. But other than that, I just want to say thanks to everyone. Any more shout outs for you, Keelan Guy, before we say goodbye?
No, just shout out to everyone who showed up, was hanging out here in stream chat, or otherwise just lurking and enjoying their matches. And yeah, shout out to anyone who's continuing to play these events. It's always fun having nice competitive casts of players, but also people who are just cooking, innovating, bringing things that they think are fun. It's always awesome to see.
Yep. Congrats to Yo for taking the victory, and we'll see everyone next time. I'm still planning on coming back next week as well. I'm gonna try to coordinate with Spooks to decide whenever he wants to start streaming things again. I think he's back from vacation, but I do not know when he's planning on streaming again. But either way, it'll be on my channel or his. Take a look to see what is going on. But past that, have a good rest of your evening or morning if you are the Kelon guy and is maybe going to sleep here shortly. But other than that, thanks for everyone that joined, and we'll catch you later.
Take care.